you pitch, if you don't mind, libertarianism as you understand it in the American context to us?
Well, you're throwing me a big softball. I have no problem with that. I mean, I am an economist and I am a free market libertarian. I have social conservative views in some respects, but generally, I believe that the state should be relatively uninvolved in people's lives. So I would say that I'm a social conservative in an ethical and a moral sense. Broadly speaking, I'm a libertarian in terms of a legal sense. So here, I think actually that is a decent way to start. Is libertarianism, and by the way, I have a client call I'm waiting on. So at some point here, I may get a message. I did
You
really
just
just
jump
jump
off
on
whenever you
because,
need to.
yeah, well, I'll let you know. I'll let you know. So
Yeah.
I don't know when that guy's on another meeting. So, and also, I was an elected official in Texas at one point. I
Right.
represented 100,000 people in the city government. I was elected when I was 22 years of age, and that was actually why I started with Brooke Rollins, as we started a local government think tank and made some significant reforms in that. So, libertarianism, or I would just say generally the support of freedom, free markets, is fundamentally predicated on the idea that individuals are more effective at ordering society through their own use of what they view as their best interest than having a centrally directed and planned society or economy. So, an example of that would be, if, I mean, of course, this is what Adam Smith called the invisible hand, a Scot, but nevertheless, pretty smart guy. And the invisible hand idea is very simply this: if you and I and maybe a few others here, let's say we all hate each other. Let's say we're all completely different. Someone's Catholic, someone's Protestant. I'm Orthodox Christian.
Hmm.
Someone's a Muslim. But we all have different things maybe that we specialize in. Like maybe you cut down trees on your property and you're very good at sawing lumber. I happen to be exceptionally good at catching fish, and someone over here is really really effective at growing wheat on their land. They've been really effective with agriculture, and so on and so forth. Each of us can specialize in something that we are good at, or maybe even exceptional at. We can do it better and at a relatively lower cost and relatively higher productive capacity than anyone else. So we might hate each other, but for our selfish reasons,
Hmm.
we want the products that the other people make. Now, each of us could perhaps generalize and do everything. I could catch the fish, I could saw my lumber, I could grow my wheat. Of course, you think of the American homestead and in fact, yes, old estates and so forth in Europe and
Hmm.
Ireland and
Hmm.
UK. That's true. People did that, but never as effectively or productively as when people collaborate in an economy, in a market system, through the price system to be able to find others who can do a better job of that thing. So it makes it possible, a free market economy, for everyone to be selfish and yet to give value to others, because the only way you can actually create value for others is and is create value for yourself, I should say, is by creating value for others. You're trading when you buy something with a medium of exchange like money or even a Bitcoin, for example. You're trading a portion of your time that represents. That's fundamentally what a medium of exchange represents, is time. You're trading a portion of your time for something else that you value more than that amount of your time. You're trading your value for something else of value. This is in a free market economy how we all collaborate to make things that we would otherwise not be able to make. Milton Friedman used the example of a pencil, although he actually borrowed it and he admitted that he borrowed it. But he said, not one person in the world, in the Free to Choose series in 1980, wonderful, wonderful TV series. If anybody's ever not seen that, I urge you, if you want to know about free market economics, go watch Milton Friedman's Free to Choose, and also mourn the loss of Hong Kong, which he uses in the first episode, because Hong Kong as it was is no longer as it is. Now it's really controlled by China. But in the episode, he cited it at the time, it was the freest economy in the world under British control. But in any case, he said no one can create a single pencil by themselves. And he said that sounds like an extraordinary statement, but it's true. All of these different hands have to collaborate. All these people who do things. Somebody makes the paint. Somebody gets the wood. Somebody gets the graphite. Used to be lead. Somebody creates the eraser, the trees, in Indonesia, the rubber trees or wherever. All these different things have to come together. The only way we can do that without central planning is a price system and people bidding and accepting value from others and vice versa. If you try to centrally plan it, we wonder, well, wouldn't that be better? You might say, well, wait a minute. If one person planned it, they could maximize the utility. This is the idea, of course, that Karl Marx
Mm.
had. He said, well, if you plan an economy, then you can take away the supposed greediness of all of the producers. But the problem is that very greed is what makes it work. Because when you try to centrally plan something, no individual, no Politburo, no committee is smart enough to singly and uniquely create all of the various designs of an economy under themselves and have maximum efficiency. It is the very competition of the various producers and the suppliers that makes the
Mhm.
price system drive costs down and makes it possible for these incentives to be there so people will make things. You know, the Starship, which interestingly, SpaceX is, of course, a government contractor. But what Elon Musk is really betting on is not government contracts. He's betting on the fact that if America or any country can build the thing that goes to Mars, that will be such a windfall on a personal level. He's driven with a purpose and a passion, but he also sees that it's a remarkably profitable venture to have a benign monopoly that has better technology than anyone else. So too the guy that made TSMC, right? The TSMC is so far ahead of chip production. By some estimates, NVIDIA's CEO said TSMC is 20 years ahead in chip production on everyone else, and they make everybody's chips. Everyone, Apple's chips, NVIDIA's chips, everybody's going to TSMC. And so this is why we had, of course, the shortage worldwide of cars because TSMC makes the chips. So when you have all of these various things in a price system, people are incentivized to make the best thing possible. And we work together collaboratively. I think central planning has been proven to not do that. The Soviet Union couldn't make a car that didn't break down after 5 miles. You know, the the Italians are so damn involved in their cars that even to this day, Italian cars are shoddily made. I mean, the quality of Chrysler vehicles dramatically declined after Daimler Chrysler got involved with the Italians. And that's not even a joke because the Italians, I mean, it is kind of a joke. A lot of, especially people in the UK and so forth, like to joke about Italian cars. Well, their car's
Mhm.
not great, but it's because of
No.
the state involvement in regulations in making the cars. And why do you think that's different than, for example, a Japanese model? The Japanese are extraordinarily efficient and they make very, very good cars because the Japanese had to. The tariffs that the US, the protectionist tariffs, actually, ironically, that the US imposed on Japanese automakers starting in the 60s and 70s when they started freaking out about, hey, wait a minute, these guys are going to come and they're going to destroy the big three automakers and all this. So what happened is the Japanese had to be that much more efficient. They could drive the price down so that they could import a car and have a car that would last longer because they didn't have a support network for it. They wanted
Mhm.
to source supplies from different places because they didn't have all the integrated stuff that Chrysler and Ford and GM had. And then the great irony of all is in 1989, Toyota opened the Toyota Money Manufacturing of Kentucky, where not only did they build a car in Kentucky, which meant they weren't any longer subject to the tariffs, but it was still as just as good of a car. And then so Toyota had a car that was better than everything else the big three put out for $10,000 less at the time, adjusted equivalent. This is how markets work. I mean, markets work around things like tariffs, they work around regulations as best as it can. And at some point, you're going to break the back of the Henry Reardons of the world, and they're going to have to give up because you're just going to make it so hard for them. But if we stay largely out of the way of the market, it tends to solve most of these problems on its own. Supply and demand works. And if you've never seen a supply and demand graph, which I'm sure everyone here has, but it's
Mhm.
very worth reading and understanding just basic economics and understanding why that works. The best book, I think, by the way, is Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. If you're going to read one book, that's probably the book. It does a better job of explaining this, I think, than anything else. And then secondarily, I would say Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman, both of which are very old books. But, you know, these are very basic ideas, and it's really a radical idea, but it's a fresh idea. You know, they act like socialism is a new idea. Socialism is the oldest, shittiest idea of all because socialism is the idea that some people rule over others effectively. That's what it ends up becoming every time.
Yeah.
And that's the only way it can work. Well, that's the oldest
Self-exercise
idea
of
ever.
power. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And authoritarianism and totalitarianism are the oldest ways of organizing human society because some people want to rule over others. You know, Cain killed Abel. Go all the way back if you want to. Okay. But really, that is how it always has worked. So freedom is the radical idea. And I think the best idea. And that's what
Jess,
I would
can I
generally say.
Can I just jump in there because it's a good segue there to another big point on political libertarianism. First of all, what a brilliant breakdown! Thank you. What a brilliant introduction to the economic principles. But you touched on an important one there now, which is the idea of non-aggression or zero aggression principles. And this is, I know that Gerard talks about this a lot in his writing as well. Um, you talked about Cain and Abel. We talk about the exercise of power. Um, how you start with this idea, this idyllic picture that we all can imagine: the American farmstead, the Irish, the Irish um, Cronog kind of settlement. If we take it back to this level, how important is force? How important is non-aggression? How important is consent of trading between parties and individuals, and how can that be managed? Because at some point, it is very attractive to come in with a giant sledgehammer and take from the weaker what you think you can take.
And I think all of us believe that we wouldn't do that, right? We would all love to believe that
Of
it's
course,
against our
of course.
better nature, but in truth, most people, given the opportunity, will consider using force on some level, although we all know that it's wrong. And I think that's the thing, is it is against actually our better nature, which is to not use force, is to collaborate.
Mm. Yeah.
However, we have to remember that the only, and I think this is the guiding force of libertarianism, or generally speaking, free market ideology, and let's say personal freedom, civil libertarianism is what usually it's called, is
Mm.
that government is the only entity in the world, a government, that has a legal monopoly on the use of force. So if you believe it's wrong to kill people, why is it okay for government to kill people just because they happen to do something that does not, negatively affect another person's life or liberty? And in a most extreme society situation, for example, if you're, a Robert Mugabe or Kim Jong Un or something like that, you see that these societies do use force against their political enemies. They imprison
Hmm.
and they do
Hmm.
horrific things, and it's one of those things that has no racial or religious boundary. Everyone has done it to everyone else at various times in history. The thing is that with force, you can get an outcome, but the outcome is always going to be that one person has to have control over another. And so the better principle of non-aggression or non-violence is to say that you will have as much freedom as you want, but the freedom that you have is limited by the extent of your fist. Your freedom ends when your fist reaches your friend's nose. Okay, you don't have the ability to go out and dirty another person's roof with your soot, for example.
Mm.
That's called externalities, right? So the best laws, and when I was a councilman, actually, I used to argue this, and they didn't know what the hell I was talking about. I mean, they kind of did, but it was like basically, if you're going to create a law. Okay, let's like say, for example, I'm from Houston. Houston's the biggest city in the United States without zoning laws. Zoning laws are extraordinarily stupid. Like, why should you tell someone how to use their property? Why is government going to know better how that property should be used? What does make sense is if you say, okay, if someone were to, for example, develop something on their property that creates a emission of pollutants or creates a discharge of liquids or waters or toxins or something like that, yes, that's an externality. And then the law can deal with that. But the non aggression principle, the principle of essentially minding your own damn business, is, just because you can see someone using their liberty in a different way doesn't mean it should be outlawed. This could actually be extended to a lot of things, personal freedoms as well. Why should government be involved in your bedroom? I don't think that government should be teaching our children transgender ideology, but I also don't think that government should outlaw transgenderism, because that would be stupid. If somebody wants to dress up as a different person or gender or change their body, I mean, who am I to say that they shouldn't do that? I don't think that they should teach that in government schools, however. And to be honest with you, I think government schools have been largely a failure throughout the world. The best and most innovative institutions actually have been private, whether that's universities or whether that's K through 12, we would say in the US, K through 12 schooling, or primary education, right? And so these sorts of things are always better left to the market and better left to individuals. Now, you could say, yes, that includes things even that people find very offensive. And to some extent, I think that's so. Here in the United States, we kind of have, if you're more of a libertarian here in the US, you have a little bit of an out because we have 50 states. And the original purpose of our Constitution was to say that the federal government has no jurisdiction over things, for example, like drugs or prostitution. It's actually up to the states. So actually, there is some of that. Drugs are federalized, but prostitution is left to the states. And actually, what's crazy here, people forget this, murder is a state issue in the United States. That's not to say murder should be legal, obviously, but the idea originally was that yes, the states would deal with these issues in different ways. Essentially, what our founders created in the US is a market for the states to compete against one another on what they viewed as the proper community standards. I think, absent a truly free society or libertarian society, this is probably the best way to organize a government is a sort of confederation or a unitary I'm sorry,
Right.
a collective of states that each compete against one another, and indeed that is
Mhm.
what we have. But generally speaking, those governments that stay out of people's lives tend to be far more prosperous. There are differences in societies. I mean, I think an example of that would be Singapore, right? If you've ever read about Lee Kuan Yew or read any of his stuff, very interesting guy, right? Clearly, he believed in freedom and in personal freedom, but the laws that he enacted were intended to kind of paternalistically guide his society. And I think you could make an argument that in that society, perhaps there was some degree of appropriateness to it, considering what they had emerged from, right? But the one thing that's true about personal freedom and economic freedom that is true consistently, and you can't really repeat it enough because it's so true. Europe has the fantasy that you can have personal freedom but not economic freedom. That is not true. That has never been true and it will never be true. You can have economic freedom but not personal freedom. Augustus Pinochet was a perfect example of that in Chile. In fact, China under Hu Jintao was a perfect example of that to some degree, that they had a great deal of economic freedom. Is where Alibaba came out of, and Jack Ma, and many great
Right.
entrepreneurs. But when you start to take away the economic freedom, people cannot vote with their property any longer. They cannot vote with the thing that is clearest to them, which is the dollar and the way they spend their time. So then you necessarily must also restrict personal freedom as well. There cannot be personal freedom without economic freedom. If you take economic freedom away, personal freedom always inevitably follows.
Professor Kinsella is here. Professor, can you hear me
Yeah,
there?
yeah,
Um,
I,
I would love to hear your perspective on some of this, particularly in the Irish context. And I mean, you have an astonishing career with the Irish Central Bank and further afield. I'd love to hear your breakdown on the Irish economy, and could we ever have anything resembling this a libertarian style economy?
well, very briefly, I think we've had a couple of really good presentations on basic economics, and particularly on what I most admire in Gerard Casey, who's a colleague of mine in UCD, and that's on the importance of libertarianism as he defines it. I think the thing that really fascinates me is that Ireland projects in its government and in its policies uh, the idea that it's radical and that there's a huge emphasis on freedom and uh, we're the best in the world.
Mm.
And it's simply not true. Irish politics is in stasis. Um, we
Mm.
are dependent on a very small number of multinational companies
Mhm.
who are a channel for huge uh, influence on government policies. And it's striking, when you look at the monopoly that the big parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the monopoly that they've exercised over the last, really since the foundation of the state, but more
Absolutely.
specifically since 2010, how they project that image, but they are probably the most repressive and oppressive, and I would use the word regime in
Mhm.
terms of what we actually see them pushing. They're one of the most repressive regimes in Europe. And that's such a pity because it highlights the gap that is in Irish politics largely. There are some exceptions. I think AM2, for example, are doing a really good job. But
Right.
we, oh, yeah, I mean, look at the controversies at the moment. Look at the extent of control, the extent of intervention in the lives of people. Look at the legislation like the putative hate speech uh, bill, um, an, an obnoxious piece of legislation without any legal foundation. And I think Gerard Casey and libertarianism and the philosophy and the wit and the wisdom with which he projects that is it's a missing piece in Ireland. If we are to be democratic, if we are to liberate people from the mythologies and control that now invest us, that's where we need to be at. And I think,
Professor.
yeah,
Oh, sorry. Finish your thought,
no, that's
please.
no.
Okay, I was going to ask you because it's we're lucky to have you here. So, crudely
Well, I
put,
turned in, by the way, I tuned in to hear the wisdom and wit, like
I
everybody else listening
I
of
know it's a
Gerard Casey.
disaster.
And
Uh,
it's such a shame.
He's brilliant. He's brilliant. I spoke with him before, and we he didn't record properly, so only the ones who were lucky enough to tune in at the moment got to hear it. He was phenomenal, and so that's why I wanted him back, record it, and
Yeah,
get it out to more people. But so being blunt here, so if we go through, we had De Valera's protectionism. After that collapses, we then see both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael essentially lock arms and embrace both the EU project and the foreign direct investment while abandoning the Irish native industry completely, saying, look, it didn't work under this period. Let's go with the quick fix. But it seems to me, and again, you're the expert, so I'll defer to you completely, that the quick fix became the norm, and and eventually the quick fix, they got hooked on it. And do you see any it's not a way out, but rather a will to find a way out, a will to stand on our own 2 feet as as a functioning capitalist society. Like I said, the native economy is utterly stripped out and dying on its feet. Whatever semblance of do it yourself is there is dying on its feet, as far as I can see.
I would say two things, and I tried to explore this with my co-author in a book called Troiconomics, which epitomized for me it was an account of the imposition on Ireland of the rule of the Troika. Now, in the book, we contrast how Hungary behaved and how Ireland behaved. Both had economies in crisis. Both had a banking crisis at the heart of that. When the IMF, well, particularly the European institutions, I would examine largely the IMF because I've been in the IMF Institute and I have great respect for the professionalism of the IMF. Our our adversaries during that crisis were the European institutions, were the European Central Bank and the Commission. Now, why was that? It was because Europe has lost touch with its foundational principles. In terms of economics, people like Adenauer, they were Christian democracies. But of course,
Right.
Europe today has excised God, and it is
Mhm.
a very repressive society and a very repressive regime, and we have taken our lead from Europe. Now, Hungary, on the other hand, when the European institutions came knocking, said, thanks, but no thanks. We'll handle this ourselves. And they did. And their adjustment policies during the crisis and their success, relatively speaking, since then, has been very striking. They have retained a Hungarian identity. They have retained a
Mhm.
sense of the nation and the values and principles of the nation. And probably most of all, they have retained the idea that a government is there to serve the national interests. We have lost that in Europe, and we've lost it in Ireland. And just reflecting on your question, I think back on, I was a callow economist in the central bank when T.K. Whittaker was the governor.
Wow.
He was everything people say of him. He was a completely admirable man in his life and in his economics and in his grasp of what was happening to the country and what was happening to Ireland at the time that he came in uh, with um, uh, with the government that came in. I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, 57, 58, and Lamass.
That's right. Sean Lamass, 58 was, I think, the year, wasn't it?
It was, but here's the extraordinary thing. At that time, Whittaker made it very clear that the country was in the midst of a real crisis, a crisis
Yeah.
of migration of people, and indeed a crisis of a countryside, a domestic economy that was on flat tires and was
Yes.
threatened. When you go back and you look at what he said, it was threatened by starvation. I mean, and people people forget that if you wanted to see T.K. Whittaker, you would see him at 7:30 outside Donnybrook Church going into Mass. Uh, he was all of that, and in a sense, he was very like Adenauer in that regard. They were men who lived their lives privately. They didn't wear it on their sleeves. He certainly didn't, but it informed their thinking. And when you think what Europe was bequeathed, the legacy of people like Adenauer, and what it ditched, what it sold out on in terms
Right.
of values. Hungary has kept those values. And to be very blunt, Europe detests it. And also, I would say, has used everything from political blackmail to fiscal subjugation to get Hungary to be less than it is as a nation. Now, I think that's something that we need to reflect on. It goes hand in hand with libertarianism. People have you have a political philosophy, but as your speakers have pointed out, it's quite different to the ideals by which we struggle to live by in our ordinary lives. You ditch God, normative values, a commitment to freedom, a commitment to values. You ditch that at your cost.
This is fascinating to me because a lot of the times, and I'd love to get both of your opinions on this, Jess and Professor Kinsella, that
Ray.
thank you, Ray. I think that a lot of people believe that libertarianism is synonymous with globalism because, you know, the idea of no tariffs, free trade. But I know that Professor Casey, and listening to you, Ray, you can wed libertarianism to a sense of the nation, so that there's libertarianism that serves the nation, and
completely.
yes. So that, I think, is interesting to a lot of people. A lot of people, when they hear libertarianism, mightn't think that.
No, I think that's a really important point. There was incidentally a long, he was within 10 or 15 years of T.K. Whittaker. There was a great Irish civil servant called Frank Duff. Now, some of you may be aware of him. Frank Duff grew up in the civil service. He served as a secretary to Michael Collins. Had he stayed in the Department of Finance, he would have certainly emulated T.K. Whittaker. He went a different route. He founded the Legion of Mary. And I suppose in our skeptical secular age, we don't understand or haven't taken the trouble to look at what Frank Duff did with the Legion of Mary. Just very briefly, there was a stage in the early 2010, 1910 to 1915, when the biggest plague in Ireland or in Dublin was urban poverty and prostitution, and the state did feck all to support efforts to help women who were trapped in prostitution and to address the real problems of urban poverty. Frank Duff did, and he cleared out, with a small group of women, he cleared out prostitution, which is probably greater in Dublin at the time than in any other capital city in Europe. He was
Really?
driven
Wow.
by values, and he was driven by values, but he was shaped by a magnificent vision of exactly what you said: service to the nation,
Yes.
devotion to the nation, to the national interest, uh, to not bowing, to use the terminology of the discussion to date, and I don't want to say any more. There are lots of people there with much more important things to say, but Hungary has never been afraid to stand for its national interest. If you
Mhm.
want to see a critique, not of what Europe was, and Europe had so much going for it, as people like philosophers like Roger Scruton have pointed out, Europe had so much going for it. What is it today? It's an oppressive, woke-driven regime that does not support the freedom of individuals, much less the freedom of nations to serve their people. That's what's missing. And that, exactly as you said there, you can have both. You can have what
Mhm.
Frank Duff called true devotion to the nation, service up to the nation, patriotism, as in terms of what America would be saying. Uh, but you can have that quite separately from your own beliefs. The two align. And what I, just a final thought, why are we in stasis in Ireland? Why are we trapped in a government and in a regime that advocates legislation like hate speech, that comes down hard on communities trying to give a voice to their people? Why is Ireland in stasis? Why is it that America can turn on a dime and you can have somebody like Trump, President Trump, coming in and advocating radical ideas and people gravitate towards them and
Right.
America changes? That change is missing in Ireland. There's a
Right.
paucity of it.
This is what fascinates me, Ray, is exactly this point. When you hear Jess speak, and when you hear your typical American libertarian speak with this great passion and energy and excitement, and they see the real benefits, I often wonder what is missing in the Irish psyche that doesn't allow this to take root. Um, and we have had plenty of options. Ray, if I can ask you one last thing here, you've been very good to us. Because there have been plenty of options. If we look back to the start of the state, we had Cosgrave, who was dabbling with laissez-faire policies, but then he ran up against the Great Depression and other issues just with the switch over to a new nation. Then we see De Valera, he made hay with that and came in with his economic model. When his economic model crashes, it ushers in this radical new economic model, which is what we are in the middle of today, the foreign direct investment economy. And when we then in 2010, again, when there was that crash, there was a massive window or an opportunity for a new movement. Sadly, there was no libertarian or right wing movement there, and so the beneficiaries were Sinn Féin, People Before Profits, and socialist models, which would have been an even worse disaster than what we have. Um, do you think that? I mean, economics in a way dictates change, political change. I know people they'll get touchy if you say that a good crash, spurs
I don't buy it.
change.
A good crash brings misery to so many
Okay.
people. I would just flip that back at you and at the people who very patiently are
Hmm.
listening. Um, and I look at Europe today, at war. No, I don't want to second guess what people think about the war and who was responsible. It's just that I've been writing about it recently.
Hmm.
Why is there a war in Europe? Why is it that the European Commission and the European Council have not been advocating for peace, for discussions? Why is it that the war incorporated has got such a hold on us that even in Ireland, that we are nominally neutral, we're not neutral at all.
Right.
Why are we support? Why is it not a politics that advocates for uh, for true political disengagement from the politics and the commerce of war? I
Yes.
really wish Gerard was here because he has so much to share with the audience on that. But war and a dependence on war and stakeholders in the war game who benefit immensely. And you can look at the data and look at the trade in arms. That's not what Europe was born out of. Europe
Hmm.
didn't come from that. I think it comes back to values, and that would be why. I remember when T.K. Whitaker left the central bank, one of the first things I asked him to do was to come out and talk to a small parish group we had. And he talked about um, developing countries and the need to get aid to developing countries. He immersed himself in prison reform. He, as a chancellor of the University of Ireland, he came back and sat as an undergraduate, learned in doing a degree in Celtic studies. Where are the people of that caliber in
Yes.
Ireland today?
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
question.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I noticed that during the Celtic Tiger. I noticed that we were losing touch completely with our heritage. So my background's in archaeology. That's what I studied first and foremost. I did my master's and I was an archaeologist for a long time and I came up steeped in folklore and all of
Look
that.
at you.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and but that's what I have noticed since that break, since the Celtic Tiger collapse. I've noticed a profound disconnection between people and their archaeological landscape and their broader culture. And I do think that that's going to produce a lesser breed of men.
But I'd like to, people who have been very patiently listening will have much more erudite answers to that. I think it's a key question. When you lose connection with your identity in whatever form it is, your countryside, your culture, your storytelling, your individuality, when you lose touch with that, you're lost, you're adrift, and you really have very little to add.
Mhm.
But you do have an enormous dependency burden, and dependency, whether you're a nation or a person struggling with addiction, dependency is never a good thing. And I'll finish on that. I found the discussion really interesting, and I'm grateful to you for giving me a chance to speak.
That you were fantastic. Thanks for coming on, and hopefully I'll get you back again. Jess,
God bless you.
if if you have a
Well,
moment,
I wanted to add to something he just said
please do.
before you answer your question. So, Professor Kinsella, if you can still hear me,
Yes, I can indeed.
the great Irishman who, of course, migrated a bit, but Edmund Burke once
Ah,
said,
yes.
"Good order is the foundation of all things," and I think this is the difference between a free society and a centrally planned one. Is that in a free society we still believe in things like patriotism,
Yes.
nationalism, morality, faith, family, except that the difference is we believe that it is ordered by human beings in their own private affairs and not by a group of central planners deciding for everyone else.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. We are not a free society in Ireland. We trade on our reputation. We trade on the idea that we are a neutral state. We trade on the idea that we have, quote unquote, European values. What are they? Where are they gone? Why
Mm,
is there not an incentive in Ireland today to look to America, not to any particular um, politics per se, but to look to the idea that a nation, if it's a nation with values and ideals, can listen to the people and can respond to what they are manifestly seeking. We've lost that sense so far in Ireland, and I hope there are people listening, women and men listening, who can address that question. It's our greatest need at the moment.
I would hope that anyone there listening who has any questions or anything you want to throw in would request to come up and ask. Aidan will let you on a microphone there. If you have anything you would like to throw in, we've been incredibly lucky with the speakers we've had on, considering what happened here. That's absolutely brilliant. Jess, could I ask you something? And I know this is, a difficult and an ephemeral kind of question, but what's the political milieu or the cultural milieu that allows a Rand Paul or a Ron Paul to have these successful careers in US politics? And why don't we have that here is what I have to try and figure out. But I would like to get a sense of what is the culture that they emerge from. Who is electing them?
I'm sorry, I was having a little bit of trouble. Um, I was having a little bit of a trouble unmuting there.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Jess.
So, yeah, it's a very interesting question because in both cases, um, obviously we don't use a Westminster system, right? And so I would argue that to some degree, in a true Westminster system, in theory, first past the post kind of a situation, right? That would make it easier. I've had that debate and thought with American people who believe in freedom. That debate has happened because in some of our party primary processes, it's effectively that. It's a first past the post. And then in others, it's a winner take all. And so that you have a primary process where in the party, for example, in the Republican Party, you have, and this is what happened with Rand Paul, and it is not what happened with Ron Paul the second time around that he ran for Congress, but this is, of course, how Donald Trump won and so forth, is that you have a party process that selects for the majority within a party, and then it goes to a general election where a majority, or in the case of a presidential or a general election, it is whoever gets the plurality in that system most of the time. It's complicated, but basically the party primary is the place where a minority quote unquote view has an opportunity to flourish,
Uh-huh.
right? So I think part of it is that in a Republican Party primary, for example, in a state like Texas, where I am, if you have a candidate that is more right wing, they might be the right 20%, let's say, of the electorate. And you might say, well, goodness, 20% of the electorate, that's not a very large base. Until you consider that the most likely people to participate in a party primary process are the people on the what could be called, and I don't say it with a pejorative, because I'm there, so I guess this would count to me, but the quote unquote extreme ends, right, or the farthest ends. So in the Democratic Party, it's generally the people on the far left, the people who are the statists, the big government people, the radicals, the Marxists. If you want to get pure, they're the Marxists, I guess, socialists, and then you have in the Republican side more of a kind of a rough coalition on the end, you might say, of libertarians. You have people who are very strong social conservatives who are, at least generally in favor of less government, right? But they might be okay with the government regulating certain things that a pure libertarian wouldn't be okay with. And then you have people who maybe were more nationalist or populist, right? So these are the people for whom, for example, immigration is the biggest issue because they worry about the culture.
Mhm.
That's kind of been the coalition. And then in the middle of the Republican Party, or I should say to the left side of the Republican Party, if you think of it as the right half of the
Mhm.
spectrum, which is not even true, but let's just
Okay.
make it easy that way. And you take that as 100%. The left side of that would be people like George W. Bush, Jeb Bush, Dick Cheney, people who believed in warfare as a primary expression of the state. That these are the people for whom literally Randolph Bourne, who was a famous anarcho-capitalist thinker in the U.S. At the turn of the 20th century, he wrote that war is the health of the state, meaning that effectively, for many people, war is kind of the way that a government, you know,
Right.
integrates itself and bolsters its power and so forth. And that is true. And for
Yeah, that
Bill
goes back to
Kristol
what
is
we
another
talked about.
famous
Yeah.
thinker. Yeah, and although I think it was Saint Bridget of Kildare who said, we should always strive for peace and everything, right? So, I mean, I could bring in Irish thinkers however much you want,
You're doing
but
great. Yeah, man.
well, Eastern Orthodox. So, but the thing is that when we have a party primary process, it tends to blow, or the winds blow, based upon the ideals of the time. When Ron Paul was elected in the 1970s originally to Congress and then reelected in the 1990s, both of those
Mm,
times, he was in a local congressional district. And a district at that time was probably 500,000 people for a member of the House, the lower House of Representatives, which is proportional. There's 435 of them, and they're allocated based on population. The number of House seats that you have plus the two senators, and then one creates, or I'm sorry, the number of House seats plus the two senators creates your electoral college votes in the electoral college system that we have, right? And so those seats can be won by people who have great local
right.
understanding and connection. So Ron Paul was a doctor who was an OBGYN who delivered quite literally thousands of
Hmm.
babies in his congressional district. Well, guess what? He knew a huge number of people, and so that helped him. But also, I think that the people in that area are more inclined towards being left alone. It was the Gulf Coast of Texas, so Trump's going to rename it, I guess, the Gulf of America. I suggested we should name it the Gulf of Texas, but we can agree to disagree on this.
Nice try.
Um, but basically, these are people who are they've been there for generations in some cases. They're very independent thinking,
Yeah.
and they want to be left alone. And that's true even of the Hispanic or the Mexican people or the Mexican origin Latin American people in that district. They're very, very independent. For Rand Paul in Kentucky, Kentucky actually historically was more of a government dependent state with a lot of union involvement, and still to this day. I think what benefited Rand was, and also Thomas Massey, by the way, is in Kentucky, who's now the Ron Paul of
Right,
the
right.
U.S. House, who I know is a wonderful guy. Um, and the first time I ever saw a Tesla was that Thomas had one, and he charged it with solar on his farm that he built himself, his house in Kentucky. Go look on YouTube; you can see a great documentary about that done by, I think it's called the Free the People Foundation. So they did this 30-minute documentary about how he has this off-the-grid house. But very interesting guy. So that's actually kind of how Rand got in. Is in 2010 there was a Tea Party wave
Yes,
going in the United
yes.
States. It was called the Tea Party, right? This backlash against big government. And it was, of course, totally tied to Obama. One of the trends that we see, and I would argue you see this in every country, but I think in the US, because of our system, it's an especially chronic situation where every 2 years there tends to be a pendulum that swings. In the first 2 years of a presidential administration, inevitably, the president, who's the broadest seen public figure in American politics, is going to do something that ticks off a whole lot of people, right? I mean, governing is even by someone that we like, right, or that we want to succeed. Governing is tough, and they're
Of
not.
course.
You're never going to agree with somebody 100% of
Of
the time.
course.
So Obama took some steps in his first period of time, their first year or so, that really ticked a lot of people off, and people were upset because of the recession, and so this Tea Party thing came. I anticipate in 2 years it's possible that Republicans will do well because Trump has such an enormous mandate and a feeling. But I think the feeling historically you would expect to actually go away. So if he didn't, it would be different. So, but Rand Paul was elected in one of those situations. And I think this is why we see that, is because when you have, it's not to say, so, I mean, you were talking about a recession or something. I should never hope for a crisis to make a change. Never, ever, ever.
Hmm.
But inevitably, in any system that is free, and we would say, obviously, we're a republic, right? And some of the nations around the world with free systems, they would call themselves pure democracies. I don't believe that Ireland would, obviously, but many nations would. And so, but what we would say is that any democratic system, um, that to have a change that is a mandate change, something like what Trump comes in with, you have to have on the other side a pressure that pushes people in that direction. The pressure in the United States was a combination of the restrictions during the pandemic. It was the excessive immigration that was felt in almost every community. Nothing new to us in Texas, but I went to a conference in October in Manhattan, in New York, in the big city, right? And they told me for the first time ever, I've been to New York many, 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 many dozens of times. Um, they said to me at the hotel, they said, don't walk this area. And they marked off a map. I said, why not? They said, because these hotels are used by migrants and the city is paying. I mean, these were like people that were liberals telling me this, but they said, for your safety, don't walk inside of this. I'm like, what the hell is this? This is like, this is supposed to be the beacon of America. And I can't walk, in
For
like
your sake.
half of Soho because of this. Give me a break. So it was astonishing. But see, those sorts of things touch people and they say, wait a minute. By the way, New York swung towards Trump, I think like 10 points because of that sort of thing. And these very liberal areas swung the
New
most. So
Jersey had a big
it's
swing
just
too.
necessarily the case.
Mhm.
Yes. Well, and the last thing I would say on that is that Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party of the 1980s used a similar principle in a different way. They had a oppositional defiance to communism, right, with the Soviet Union. And it was the frustration of prior administrations and Americans who had been sheltering under their desks at school for nuclear raid practice that, why couldn't we deal with this? Why can't we deal with the evil empire? And, we did all these other things. We sent people to the moon. We can't deal with the Soviet Union. What the heck? So the Republican Party at that time smartly created a coalition around opposition to communism. And that was smart. It took the Republican Party a long time after the fall of the Berlin Wall to figure out that the real opposition ought to be to socialism and Marxism and those who would enshrine the state against their political opponents. But Donald Trump defined that extraordinarily well. And I think
Mm.
the final death blow was when they came after him in the courts. If you use government against your political opponents, you're no better than Lula or any of these other
Right,
dictators
right.
around the world.
How would you classify Trump? I mean, as from a libertarian perspective, I think he came in and he really, gave that death knell to the Bush era neocon type of or powerful wing in the Republican Party. How would you? For a lot of outsiders, it would be easier to classify him as having libertarian leanings, but I'd be interested to hear a libertarian's perspective.
Sure. Hold on a second here. I'm lighting my cigar like a true libertarian, right? I'm smoking a cigar while I'm
Ah,
talking to
now
you.
we're getting cozy.
Um,
I like it.
it
Right.
could only be better if I had a drama whiskey with me. Um, so, um, so I think that Trump would be best classified as a limited government populist. By this, I mean that he does see less issue with using the state to certain ends um, than I think a true libertarian would. Rand Paul would seek in some ways, a more restrained government than Trump. On the other hand, you could argue that by his actions, certainly right now, Donald Trump is governing very much as a
Mm,
libertarian. The only things that are not libertarian about President Trump is that he wants to impose tariffs. If you're someone who believes in unfettered immigration, which certainly there are many libertarians who do, then I think you would argue that. Although I think most U.S. libertarians would say, enough is enough at a certain point. I mean, you have to have borders to secure the country, and not having borders with our welfare state means that's there's nothing less, pro liberty than having all of our tax money go to people who aren't even citizens, for heaven's sakes, a
yeah.
huge portion of it. But then also, and the externalities that creates. I think also you would see that there's a disdain. For example, President Trump has shown a great deal of favorability to labor unions. He appointed as the labor secretary a congresswoman from Oregon, Linda Chavez Reamer, I think, who is, or maybe she's from Washington. Forgive me, I can't remember exactly which state. I think maybe Washington, but she is a very pro-labor, moderate Republican, and quite a few of my dear friends in public policy in the U.S. are disappointed with her as a pick. But also, I'm not sure how serious Trump is about imposing those ideals on other aspects of the economy, because even the labor union people who voted for Trump they didn't really vote for Trump because he represented labor unions, right? They voted for Trump because he represented the soft issues
Yeah.
that the Democrats had failed them on,
Right.
like immigration and this sense of being left behind. And wondering, for example, why is it that, and this is true, by the way, if you came to the US, you drive around, you can see this. Why is it that military recruitment offices are almost exclusively located in poor neighborhoods?
Mm-hmm.
Think about that for a second. I mean, that's the kind of thing that really makes people angry. And then when they see the Iraq war, which was a total disaster, and it's managed poorly, and it's obvious that there's a handful of people profiting on it, and then there's a whole bunch of people dying because of it, they say, what is the use of this? And look at these people making the decisions, the Dick Cheneys and the Bill Kristols advocating
Yeah.
for it, the Charles Krauthammers, the Liz Cheneys. These are not people who have even fought in war, and yet here they are advocating for these kids to go to war. So I think this is what Trump represents, is sort of a retrenching of the people against the elites. Sometimes that results in not so liberty friendly outcomes, but broadly speaking, because much of what we've been dealing with is pure statism,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it generally is positive for libertarians. And I think that's the generalized consensus of most. And he also has kept promises in ways that I think most are surprised. The most obvious one is the freeing of Ross Ulbricht. I was surprised by that, to be honest. I mean, he said that at the Libertarian Convention last year that he would free Ross
Yes.
Ulbricht. He went to the Libertarian Convention, first Republican ever to do that. The lady who ran the Libertarian National Committee was roundly criticized for having Donald Trump. But I think it's hard to argue that through cryptocurrency, deregulation, and other things, Trump is clearly acting as you would expect a libertarian president to
Right.
act. So
Right.
there's not too much to there's not too much to hate here. I think JD Vance actually in some ways is maybe he could go either way, but I think he's more of a Russell Kirk kind of a paleoconservative,
Mm-hmm.
libertarian leaning kind of a
Mm-hmm.
guy. He might be less libertarian in some ways than President Trump. But what I love about it both is both of them are anti-war. You know, until Ron Paul ran, that was the least cool thing you could be, was
That's right.
anti-war.
That's right.
Really. I mean, I was a delegate to two Republican national conventions. I was elected when I was 20 in 2008, and then I went in 2012 again from the same congressional district in Texas. I was elected by the congressional district party, and I was a elected official the second time, local official. First time I was just involved, and it was extraordinary because I remember when John McCain was the nominee in 2008
Mm-hmm.
in St. Paul, Minnesota. All these old blue, we would say blue-haired ladies. I don't know that you have the same expression, but we'd say the old blue hairs. They would go, "So why are you here, young man? What do you care about?" And and I would say, well, you know, I'm involved. I'm a Republican. You know, I really value free markets, liberty. You know, I love Milton Friedman. I've always been in favor of that, and I'm interested in learning as much as I can. And they would always come back to a single question. I mean, truly, like dozens of hundred, maybe hundred. I mean, I had a lot of conversations. I don't know, lots of people. They would say, "Okay, that's great, but you're voting for John McCain, right?" Well, yeah, sure, but like, what about but what about this whole war thing? Like, I mean, like, do you think we really need to keep going with this? And
Mm-hmm.
oh, I don't know. But what about John? You're voting for John McCain. There was just this rally around the flag
Yeah.
mentality. So even though Trump's critics would say all of Trump's supporters are sycophants, I don't really see that at all. I see what is happening is a great, intense personal loyalty for a man who has largely kept his promises
Mm-hmm.
and frankly does not give a damn about pissing off people in Washington D.C., which is very refreshing. And he's not like a Duterte or one of these kind of more authoritarian
No,
populists or like Yoon Suk Yeol, who just freaking declared martial law in
that's
South Korea.
right.
What the hell was
That's
going
right.
on with
Yeah.
that? I mean, Trump's not going to do that. And so, because of that, we can disagree with him, but we know that he's at least standing up for a certain thing that he believes in. And I think that's very refreshing. And nobody says, oh, well, you have to be this, you have to be that. It is a bigger tent than I think most realize. So I think that's what he represents. And the party, if you can see it from a macro perspective, is consolidating around this idea that regardless of exactly what you think, you know, maybe you're gay, maybe you are an atheist, or maybe you're a social conservative, maybe you're a whatever. You can get around the idea that we can all live in a free society and we can all put America first, so to speak, and not focus on just the
Oh,
That is what is
Lagging a
going
little
on.
bit.
I think it's a lasting coalition, though. I do think it will last for a long time.
Jess, I first went to the US when I was a young man. It left a huge imprint on me when I was a student. 2002, so obviously a very pivotal moment in modern American history. And exactly like you were talking about, there was this: you dared not question the commander in chief, and war was good, and you do not in any way question the troops. That was then. I went back several times shortly after, and I could see the change as the war in Iraq dragged on. And I wonder what effect, to what degree did that war in Iraq, what effect does that have in the popularity of the modern libertarian movement? Um, and I think that seeing it, and I do think now we saw over the course of this election that it's spread maybe beyond the strictly libertarian base of the Republican Party, and that we are seeing a major shift where war isn't cool anymore, where war isn't the defining um,
Right.
for a
Well,
lot.
I think the answer to that is simple, and I'll keep my answer short. I'm going on a little bit long here. The 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 honest truth is, oh goodness gracious, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm actually surveying this property, and this person's coming over to see what I'm doing. Just hold on, just 1 second.
You can hop off there,
Hey, I'm
Jess,
here.
and see what.
Oh yeah, just 1 second. The property. Okay, I
Jess, you might
apologize.
want to
Yeah, no,
mute
he
your
told me
mic
to
for a
come look at
moment.
the property.
There
Okay.
you go. Owen, very interesting. What a breath of fresh air was Professor Kinsella.
Oh yeah.
Would be a wonderful person to have on a space sometime again. I think there
We
was,
need to give him his own standalone space, eh?
yeah, absolutely fantastic. And
Sorry
if I
about
could
that.
be,
Sorry about
sure, Jess. If I could be, could I be devil's advocate and ask you a question as someone who's not really that au fait with the political ideologies? I've listened very carefully to what you say about this. So I guess my big question is libertarianism in the United States. If I'm right or wrong, you correct me on this. The presidential candidate secured something in the region of less than 0.5%. Is that correct?
Well, Gary Johnson was the highest ever, and I think he got 3 or 4%. So, but yes,
So
usually it's a few percentage points at the very most for a libertarian. You're right.
okay, so something like that. I recall reading about it. So it actually had declined from 2020 to something like
It did
0.5% for
decline.
the
Yes.
right. Okay,
Yeah, because
and
the candidate was not very good. Yes.
okay. So I guess the first question really is, well, there's two questions here out of this point, right? Um, I think the first question is what is happening the movement in, first of all, why is there the decline? That's question one. And question two is, do you not think it's a possibility that Trump here just played another very smart game, cozied up to the libertarians, gave some promises actually of which he did not keep, and in relation to a position within the current cabinet, for example, and knew that out of the 650 odd thousand votes that your candidate got, that he would probably win a stack of those, has Tulsi Gabbard and
Mhm.
RFK with some, let's say, libertarian aspects to their thoughts and views, particularly like Tulsi Gabbard on war, for example, non-interventionist
Mhm.
from that perspective. So I think, maybe just put it to you as a devil's advocate question that maybe Trump cozied up because he basically took a bunch of those votes that, there was no hope that there was anything going to happen. So the two questions, if you can think of them, why is the decline?
Mhm.
And you think maybe Trump played a bit of a blinder and got some nice votes, soft votes from you guys?
I think the decline is because people don't want to throw their vote away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it's a pure vote, and there's nothing wrong with it to vote for, let's say, the Libertarian Party, or if you're a Green, the Green Party, or whatever.
Sure.
Or there was a party, the Constitution Party, which is now largely out of favor. the thing is that why would you vote for that party if you know your vote is not going to really make a difference? And that's generally true. And I think that many libertarians have come to realize what their vote usually does in some districts is to put a Democrat in office if it's a close race, right? So that is kind of the dilemma that libertarians face, and many like Rand Paul and Ron Paul. Right, Ron Paul, by the way, ran as a Libertarian candidate in 1988. Many people don't remember this, but like Ron Paul was the Libertarian candidate, and then he came back and he ran as a Republican for Congress.
Mm.
Justin Amash switched to the Libertarian Party out of Michigan, thought about running for president, decided not to. When he ran for the Senate and lost, he ran as Republican. Okay, and I know Justin too. So it's like these, it's one of those things. It's like where you can have the most influence, because also the Libertarian Party can be very dogmatic about purity, and also sometimes rather bizarre. I mean, the Libertarian Party pushes for a. There's many libertarians in the party who their primary issue, for example, is like legalizing prostitution everywhere, which is already a state issue in the US. But like if you go and push that as presidential candidate, let's say you're the best candidate ever, how many votes do you think you'll get? Not very many, right? And so, I mean, like that's the sort of thing that libertarians don't always understand. Now, as far as the question of why, and so I think Trump was a satisficing principle. He was good enough for many libertarians to vote for. As far as I wouldn't say RFK at all as a libertarian, although I like his spirit, his spiritedness. Now, Tulsi, most certainly, in at least in the issues of warfare and so forth, intelligence, she very much is. Now, what I would say is that Tulsi is, and this sort of a thing, it is a effort by Trump for sure to bring libertarians into the fold. I mean, he said that bluntly when he pardoned Ross Ulbricht. He said, "This is a." This is for the great libertarian movement, you know, or something that supported me. So, I mean, I think he made it fairly naked that, you know, it was to some extent a political calculation. But if you look at his first term, you know, the things that Trump largely was able to accomplish that were enduring was the reduction of regulations and, in some ways, even staffing in areas of the federal government that were particularly pernicious and difficult to uproot as it relates to like corporate regulations, EPA, things like that. So I do believe that a lot of what Trump did in his first term even was pretty libertarian, if it wasn't what he was well known for. We look now, it's clear that he's uprooting so much. I mean, Elon Musk, I think, on his basic level, and most of these tech guys, the rich tech guys, you know, they're pretty libertarian. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
Silicon Valley is full of people who, you know, they're basically like rich enough to where San Francisco and these liberal California laws don't affect them. But I think the broad stroke of it is that, you know, if you have a guy in office who's willing to cut all these regulations, cut spending, and do what the president can do in the US, which is to fire many of the people in the executive branch because he is responsible for the executive branch, then I think that that is a very libertarian idea. And I think most libertarians support that. Um, you know, but it always comes down to making a practical choice. When I was in office, when I would take a vote, I was a pretty, in some ways, a very pure libertarian. I never voted for a budget. I really rarely voted for any spending. And I just really had a hard time not applying my principles in a relatively strict way. That's part of the reason I didn't want to keep going because I kind of got tired of it. I was the only person that felt as I did on a 7-person legislative body. And, you know, I've seen others that do the same. But there were times when I was able to be very practical and I got a great deal done. I think it is hard for libertarians sometimes to acknowledge, but the tactics of a Rand Paul, who is at his heart certainly very much pro liberty, but he's also someone who believes in practicality, that is a more effective tactic, generally speaking, than, you know, uh, than just going against this party that gets 0.5% nationally. It just doesn't really doesn't really do anything to do that, honestly. So that's I think what happened is a lot of libertarians made a practical choice. You get back to the baseline, which is like a 0.5%, and there still has not, other than Justin Amash, who switched parties, there still hasn't been a single libertarian ever elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, and I think that really says it all. You know, I mean, like, you look at him like, okay, so Sinn Féin or something. You know, some of these parties that are, let's see, very minor parties in the parliament in the UK, they're still there, right? Somebody's there. I mean, even UKIP had a couple of representatives, right? So a couple of members. So it's very difficult to see how the Libertarian Party has much of a future when they can't get anybody elected to Congress. And they've only ever gotten, I think, 2 or 3 members of state houses outside of New Hampshire, which has 400 members, and it's a very, very small election. So it's a very hard thing to see how you're not wasting your vote. And I used to not believe that, but I have to say, in recent years, I've kind of become convicted that it's just not very effective to go that route, honestly.
Very good. Okay.
Aidan, what about Herc? Herc, you have the mic there, and I would, if you'd like to jump in, if there's anything you'd like to add to the chat this evening.
Unfortunately, you caught me when I'm eating, so I waited like over an hour, and then I finally gave up.
Apologies.
But I can come back in 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
Yeah, do that.
Doctor, I am gonna have to drop off. I may be able to come back in a bit, but I'm gonna have to drop off and talk to this property owner. I'm serving a property for a client of mine, but I will. I very much enjoyed it, and I will see you guys hopefully at some point in the near future, if not in a little while.
It was brilliant having you on, Jess. Thanks for all of your thoughts.
Thank you, guys. Anytime, invite me. Have a good one.
Very good. Very good. Very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, very, very interesting, chaps. And like I said again, I can't get over the brief discussion with Professor Ray Kinsella. That was a breath of fresh air from a perspective of his views and thoughts as a former economist with the central bank, as someone who's come from the Institute for, well, actually, I suppose that's the IMF in Washington, and to speak the way he did, and to hear his heartfelt words about his disappointment and sadness as the direction that Ireland has taken, and what he would wish and like for it and like to see happen. For me, I didn't, I'm just looking at this man now and his achievements and everything. I mean, I'm terrible. I should know more about this, but I certainly grab a copy of Trichonomics and see what that's about. But what an interesting chap! If you could get him again. I could also see numerous people in the chat liking as well as Irish people would like what he was saying in relation to Europe and how we didn't take any part, and maybe wanting to try and stop the war or open our mouth and talk about the woke agenda that we're following. And I was just really impressed. And by the way, just small bit of possible breaking news. I mean, I don't know how many people here have heard Ursula von der Leyen's speech in last week in relation to the upcoming plan for Draghi, the former Italian, let's say, big think tanker globalist that he's bringing to bear in February sometime. So they're going to launch this incredible plan. Well, the Welt just broke a story that they have the inside information on this plan that the Green New Deal will be effectively shelved to a secondary priority, and that the priority will shift away from the Green New Deal to supporting the economy and the people that are struggling. Just quite an interesting turn of events. It'll be interesting to see if it's true on.
Well, how much of that, I wonder, was because of Trump's speech?
Absolutely. I mean, if ever you'd listen to a massive dump on Davos, well, there was 2 dumps on Davos. One of them was done by a libertarian, again, for the second time. How they ever managed to bring Javier Milei back to Davos after he made a massive dump on them the first time, and then only to come and make a secondary dump on Davos, and say that when he was in Davos the first time, he was on his own, which he certainly was, but he's not on his own in Davos this time, followed by a video call from Donald Trump, where Donald Trump took a massive Donald dump on Davos, and I mean, he literally laid it out. If his recent point is, if you want to make a product, make it in America. We're going to give you some of the lowest tariffs in the world. He's going to reduce our corporation tax to 15% versus our 12.5% in Ireland. You know what? For 2.5%, I'll pop off to the United States and set up shop there, rather than deal with the shit that we have to. Excuse my French. Sorry for saying that. But I would definitely pop over to the United States and set up a corporation there for the sake of 2.5% in tax as a difference, where hopefully it'd have some liberty and freedom, and we wouldn't have this woke culture. So yeah, massive dump. What do you think of that, Owen? What were your thoughts on his dump on Davos?
I think it's great. I think that he's, from what I'm seeing, well, I've been a long time Trump supporter going back to 2016. For me, there was nothing controversial about him. It was just obvious the change was needed, and he was the best option. But what I have been pleasantly and happily surprised by is his attitude coming back this time. Like I say, he's taking a lot of brave decisions, like the pardoning of 1,600 people. He wouldn't have done that in his first term. Seeing this very forthright speech now, I know he did pull him out of various climate pacts and all in his first term, but I'm just very much enjoying his forthright approach this time out. And again, you see, people are thinking, he'll do that because he's only got 4 years. So, but he doesn't operate like that. I think he doesn't get a lot of credit for how he puts an arm around people in his sphere and nurtures talents, as he has done throughout his business career. He'll be looking to J.D. Vance taking over for another 8 years after, and a long-term program here. So he's not. We're kind of constantly fed in Europe this nonsense that he's a wild man, that he's a crazy guy, that he's not at all. He's very deliberate, and so for me, it's been a very very, very strong start. All of his various orders were promises kept, promises he made throughout his speeches, and I watched a lot, not I would say most of his campaign speeches along the way, and I was clocking the various, the messaging and what the various promises, and it's amazing. It's amazing. Like, we're not used to it. We're not used to seeing somebody, a politician, promise something and then deliver that. And so for me, it's fantastic. And I think he's bought himself a lot of credibility now, that if you look at how simply the threat of tariffs was enough to knock Justin Trudeau out of a job. People, the media like to mock him and talk about how he was calling him the governor of Canada and all that. Well, that wasn't the story, obviously. The story was that essentially Trudeau, and this is where Ireland needs to listen and learn, disrespected him. And he just very clearly says, I'm going to have a pair of balls and do what I should as the leader of the powerful nation on earth. I am going to use those powers to its fullest. I'm going to introduce a series of tariffs on Canada that will absolutely cripple your economy. And that was the coup de grace for that clown. And so I think people understand that this time around he's serious. This time around he means business, and not because he's angry, not because they tried to shoot him and kill him, not because of they're far more convincingly, as we've seen with the executive orders and with that speech. He's cool, calm, and collected, and that's frightening them. I'm interested to see where it goes. It's a hell of a start.
He's certainly come back on. You could even say it, Donald Trump would never accept it. He's certainly come back an awful lot more experienced. He's got his people around him on this occasion, which obviously the last time, because they didn't have the majority in both, he wasn't able to pick who he wanted, but he certainly is picking who he wants this time around. And I think also it's a matter of legacy. As you said, he'll pass it on to J.D. Vance, obviously, or he'll hope to pass it on to him anyway. But I think
what a prospect he is, right?
Yeah, incredible. I mean, it's an incredible thing to see his mom in tears, and considering where he's come from as an individual. It's a phenomenal story, and that's actually that's the American dream right there, if ever there was an example of it. That's for sure. But I think he's really going to follow through on so much, because first of all, he's got the experience, he's got the people behind him, he's got an incredible mandate. And I think I've always seen Trump as a narcissist. I think it's very hard to say that he's not. He loves talking about what he's done and he's achieved and everything else. I mean, I'm loving it. I'm loving him. The first time round, I didn't think he had a hope in hell of getting in. I was blown away when it happened, and it certainly woke me up. So I think I woke up in that period, and I've just thoroughly enjoyed him. And I love watching Keir Starmer squirm and the United Kingdom squirm, and Ursula von der Leyen, I think, has just, I think she's just squirmed as well. And I think that's because of what he said. I really do. Anyway, Herc is back, I believe.
Yes, Herc.
Just check in on him.
Greetings, my fellow libertarian thinkers. I'm a real left libertarian, unlike Chase Oliver.
Yeah, Herc, I noticed you say you're Green Libertarian, which is interesting for us, right? Because we've heard from a couple of guys who would be more socially conservative and economically libertarian. So, how would your philosophy differ, Herc?
Well, I have to first say that Green Libertarians are a defunct party. So it's up to individuals to define how their ideology, our ideology, will compose a presidential platform. And that's why I've been looking for independence to work for instead of someone through the Libertarian Party. Unlike your friend Fergus, I can actually break down the difference between left libertarians, pure libertarians, and conservative or right wing libertarians, if you want to call them that. Where we differ, the left libertarians, is that there's two types. Green libertarians like myself, we believe that in America and other fascist countries, mega corporations are just another arm of the government in collusion with the government to hurt the poor and the middle classes. This is why we don't believe that organizations or entities like the EPA and the FDA should be disassembled. Now I know they're really warped and they're doing the opposite of their mandate, but that's what makes us left libertarians is we believe in some type of federal authoritarianism. And I'll give you an example. Rivers that cross through several states, and as the professor was mentioning earlier, he used it in a legal context. You don't have the right to pollute upstream and hurt the people downstream is the basic principles of that. Right. The other type of watered down left libertarians are the libertarian socialists, and that is a broad category. Guys like Elon Musk and Noam Chomsky call themselves libertarian socialists, but Elon Musk is not a libertarian socialist. He has a warped idea that his type of socialism is that billionaires should get handouts so that they'll create jobs, which is just laughable. The Libertarian Socialists within the Libertarian Party before the Mises Caucus takeover were of the mind that, much like Chase Oliver's minarchist vision, that eventually entities like the EPA would be phased out and we'd have this kind of Star Trek world where we wouldn't need money per se. And, God bless them. I live in the real world and I'm not thinking about hundreds of years in the future, but I love their utopian vision. So they're not really wanted in the party. And people like me have been gate kept out of the party. There was a chair called Nicholas Sarwak before the current one, who's a Mises Caucus MAGA adjacent type, that was trying to reach out to us because he realized that in order to get increased federal funding and 50 ballot access granted, 50 state ballots, they have to go through it every time almost. At least the Greens have to. Sometimes it just automatically gets carried over because they get a certain amount of votes. But I remind people the election boards are controlled by the two fascist parties, and they often kick legitimate candidates out. And that's why when we work for campaigns, we have to actually get twice as many signatures as needed because they send their high priced lawyers to find any type of excuse to throw out signatures. So it's a really warped system we're in. And that's why the Mises Caucus has tried to define libertarianism now as conservative libertarianism. And I'll give you a few examples. The old classical libertarians believed in open borders. They believed that you didn't have the right to tell people you can't have an abortion or you can't do drugs or you can't kill yourself, even as long as you're not hurting anybody. And now it's gotten to the point, well, no, you are hurting somebody. You're hurting an unborn child, and that's been an albatross in the Libertarian Party's conflicts. So there's two bases right now: the old classic libertarians that are much like Ron Paul, that feel like uh, as less government as possible. Government doesn't have the right to uh, interfere in your lives as much as possible. I mean, that's a broad statement. But this new albatross, which Chase Oliver got sucked into, um, is giving kids drugs so that they can have sex change. And I think this was a huge mistake on his part. I understand his belief system that um, it should be up to the parents and the children involved to decide with their doctor. Uh, I, I I do think though that children do not have a developed mind and will actually want to play act, and it enables them to do harmful um, things to their body when they become an adult. And I've talked to some of these people and they deeply regret that they made these decisions as an 18, 19-year old, and it's irreversible. So I understand that conflict.
So do you then, extrapolating from that, or do you think that is there a point that adulthood, so 18, say, is classically defined, or whatever way
Right,
you
but
want,
the
from a
human brain
wider
doesn't really
perspective,
develop till 25.
okay, but is there a point then, so in your belief system, just philosophically, I'm trying to gather here, at what point does the individual become responsible for all their own actions and their own choices politically and so on, or does it just vary? So where there's a critical issue like this, which is life altering dramatically, potentially doing harm to the self, do you have any hard and fast lines and something like that?
I think it should be a local issue. I know that sounds preposterous, uh, but community standards are important, and we've lost that communal living. So I think that in a more prude state, for lack of a better term, like Utah, uh, they don't want teenagers, even 19-year-olds, doing porn. And it is kind of silly that someone can be 17 years old in 364 days, and someone can be 18 years old. And, this difference between uh, legal porn and illegal porn. Uh, but then again, you can be 16 years old with your parents' permission and join the infantry in the army. So that too is, where do you draw the line?
Do you think the conservative, socially conservative libertarians then have an easier time because selling their message because of that? You're going to
Yeah,
have.
we're very much a Christian and religious country. At least the voters are for the two parties, generally speaking. So their message now is Chase is a degenerate because he uh, is okay with giving kids drugs to have sex changes, and he also happens to be gay, and he also had this progressive ideology when he was a young man. He worked for Obama, and he was even wearing masks during the pandemic, and even though he knew that they weren't effective for COVID. So he's got mixed messaging, and he was too cowardly to face the major podcasters that were attacking him, that are part of the Libertarian Party, and who ended up telling libertarians and any independents to vote for Trump instead of Chase.
I think this is interesting. You're kind of informing us here, and maybe you're towards that end yourself, of that branch of libertarianism that does, I think socially it comes into conflict very often with the more obviously with the more conservative branch of that. But when we think of of libertarianism, I think at least nowadays it's more conservative. So I think you're in that or at least you're explaining that position, the socially left wing, which I think a lot of people, particularly here in Ireland, who are who are getting into libertarianism, are thinking about it, or who dismiss it, they will say that, yeah, it's anything goes. Oh, look, it's, it's kind of easily hijacked by globalists through open borders or whatnot, or the idea that it's my morals, my moral standard is in, it's a free for all, whatever I want to do. Is there, what would you say are the guiding principles or the philosophical underpinnings of that left libertarianism? What are the thought structures? Or is it just an individual free for all?
No, I mentioned that there has to be some kind of federal oversight because states, these imaginary beings, uh, they can't actually look to matters that go beyond their borders. So I mentioned rivers that cross through different states.
So that's the do no harm principle, really. So that
Yes.
applies to all libertarians, is one area of solid agreement.
Right, but they think that it should be done. Well, the pure libertarians, like the ones who read Machinery of Freedom, they think it should be done through the court system, whereas the left libertarians think it should be done through federal oversight.
Our last two guests on now that spoke from the American perspective, could you see yourself voting the same as them, or do you find yourself in opposition to them just as much as you might be a regular Republican or Democrat?
Well, the notion that I'm throwing my vote away for voting for something I believe in is really offensive to me. The Democrats and Republicans are basically the same uh, brand with different token gestures. And they cater to basically the same corporate interests. That's why I call them Team Blue and Team Red fascists. The idea that
the word fascist now, what's your definition of fascist?
Well, it's the Mussolini definition where he wanted to change it to corporatist, where the major interests of government and corporations are one and the same, intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to stress that I'm not throwing my vote away by voting for something I believe in. I would be throwing my vote away, especially because I don't live in a swing state. I live in California, which always goes to the Team Blue fascists, except for when Ronnie Reagan was in his second term. Uh, it's fixed so that my vote is valueless, basically. I only vote basically to keep a party's access or to promote an independent as far as the presidential election. And I think that is the solution, is to for all of us, Greens, socialists, libertarians, to compromise, to get some kind of pragmatic, class conscious centrist to unite the left and the center against the two fascist parties.
If we put you and those, and let's say, a socially conservative, libertarian, whatever, in a room together, what would be the points of agreement that you could come out with?
Well, the idea that Donald Trump is not a war criminal, almost all of us agree with. I was flabbergasted to hear such an intelligent professor try to smooth over what the war criminal Trump did. He actually dropped more bombs and drones than the war criminal Obama did in his first 4 years. And even worse, when Obama was around, the accuracy levels were much higher because we had bases in Afghanistan. And yet it was only about 90% of the time, 90% of the time we missed the intended targets. Now, in places like Somalia and Turkmenistan, it's around 98% estimated we hit our intended targets. So, also, they don't count the mercenary usage. They're also there. So that's another thing that's hidden from the public in the black budgets. Um, we're actually at war with many countries in terms of killing uh, certain individuals. And people don't look at it that way. They only look at the major wars and what they're programmed by the media.
How would you distinguish yourself from, say, a socialist, for example?
Well, they are way too authoritarian, and they want. Well, we both believe in some sort of social contract, some sort of safety net. I would be in favor of UBI if
Oh.
we had a regulated society, but everything is so corrupted that it's just preposterous, and we're so in debt that it's just impossible. So where we agree, socialists and left libertarians, is that where the corporate sector misses out on job creation, it's up to the government to supply those jobs, like proper forestry. Libertarians claim all the time that they care about property and human life. Well, by not doing that proper forestry and by proclaiming it's socialism, they're actually doing the opposite of their intentions. They're actually hurting people, like we saw in Los Angeles just recently with arsonists. And now the government was so mismanaged, they didn't even properly manage the reservoir water.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just preposterous that left libertarians and socialists are the same. Uh, we want to decentralize as much as possible, but it's a step by step process, and that's, I think, the key is that socialists want to keep the nanny state. They want to keep it as authoritarian as possible, a
Mm-hmm.
left authoritarianism instead of a right wing authoritarianism. So, okay, there'll be no homeless people, and everybody will have a job and some kind of housing. Uh, is their mandate? But will their economics actually work? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
The billionaires would probably flee to other countries. Innovation would be stifled. And this is the disconnect that they never get. They don't really understand economics has to have an ebb and flow to it. They just want to keep it in one level.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Interesting.
Interesting perspective, Herc. Very different. I mean, one
Yeah.
thing I would say to you is Ireland definitely isn't for you, Herc.
I
We're,
think,
Well, Irish people have a lot of heart, so they can actually have a more libertarian society because you have charitable organizations that actually function well. Here, it's kind of known that the homeless programs are more about paying people salaries than actually getting people off the streets.
Mhm. Very good.
yeah. Well,
Owen, we're coming up on 2 hours and 30
yeah. I
minutes.
was just going to say,
I just wanted to say, well, first of all, Herc, thank you very much, and definitely some interesting thoughts, and particularly
thanks,
in
sir.
relation to your mention of UBI, which, by the way, is something Elon Musk actually is for, which is something that I don't like at all, but that's just a personal opinion. Owen, just wondering there if there are some people I see Irish libertarian is
Yeah.
in the audience as well, and there's different people there that have been with us for quite a while. There's also an interesting request here, Owen. I will leave this to you as the host, but let me read this one out to you here. This is someone whose bio at the front says U.S. government should win the Guinness World Record for most lies told by a government. Your country's problems were caused by the United States of assholes.
Sure. Look,
This is
yeah, look, Herc is going 100%. Herc gave us that perspective in a very, very
polite way.
polite and a very
Yes, very eloquent.
civilized way. So
Very eloquent.
I think well, it was, I think what was important, what's interesting to have Herc on there too, because this room I think would be very much in the Professor Casey, Gerard Casey kind of branch of so libertarian economically, but socially conservative and
Mhm.
more nationalist. But I think it was interesting to have Herc on as well there and
Very,
explain,
and
just to
always
show that I think there is no other political philosophy or political group out there that is such a broad tent, that has such a wide appeal. So I do find that fascinating. You know, I
Yeah.
think
And while you're there and we're on the topic of it, so in a recent interview, Alice Weidel, the AFD, let's say, I guess the lady that's vying for the position in Germany, she actually declared herself a libertarian, right? And of course, we have Javier Milei with his, I suppose, a version of anarcho-capitalism. So, I mean, maybe you can explain that to me. How does she describe herself as a libertarian? Yet she's very obviously strongly branded with the far right brand, which
Oh
we
well,
know not to listen
sure,
to. But
sure.
how does that
The
fit?
branding is,
Yeah,
as we all know, is just the
yeah,
media playing gatekeeper. But I suppose it's picked up on that too, Aidan. I found it very interesting, and I think she's tapping into what a lot of Irish libertarians listening here, and I think what a lot of American younger libertarians are feeling, which is the days of the conservative, which was very much religious orientated, so Catholic, Christian here, Catholic here in Ireland, maybe. There was the Bush famously embraced that, the evangelical wing of the party. I think that's as that dissipates and as nations become more secular, and we're past that initial wave of atheism, I think people are beginning to settle down and realize that with or without religion, that there's a certain percentage of the population that just find themselves with traditional, what would be seen as conservative values, which is no puberty blockers for kids, stay out of interfering in the schools, strong family, blah blah blah, but they don't have the religious feeling. So I think we saw that as a little subtext in the Trump's victory this time around as well, which was this coalition of a lot of people like that, trendy young conservatives who wouldn't be particularly religious, who would be quite urban or whatever, a new cohort that's been there, but was quite a smaller cohort before. And Alice Weidel is a lesbian. She's married to a Sri Lankan woman.
yeah,
She's I think she says she's agnostic. She's thoroughly modern. She is an economist with a PhD. She worked for, I think, was it Goldman Sachs or one of the big
yeah,
bankers, and she's been around the world. And I think that this is a new branch in this Republican Party. And then on top of that, there's a lot of disaffected liberals, again, who were disaffected because of transgenderism or single issues, where they don't feel comfortable calling themselves conservative. And so again, a lot of these people, I think, are finding themselves more comfortable under the libertarian banner. They don't adhere strongly to a strict set of rules, say like our parents' generation or grandparent generation, which was, they've had an unshakable belief in the church, the media, the whatever, that I think we're past that, where people are far more skeptical. We're not, and with that, we're more likely to have maybe be single interest politically. And so for a variety of factors, I think a lot of people feel more comfortable under the libertarian banner than the conservative banner.
Yeah, but Owen, one of the things I admired about Jess was his admission about the vote, which Herc obviously strongly disagreed with from a standpoint of a wasted vote. I mean, personally, I would agree with Jess that it's somewhat of a wasted vote from that perspective, and he was, let's say, offended like that. But in the case of Ireland, I mean, let's be realistic here about this. Talking about libertarianism, we're not even able to get an opposition together. I mean, it's an interesting topic. It's a fabulously interesting topic, and it's an incredibly interesting ideology as well. But when we consider that we're not even able to get an opposition together, I mean, what are the chances of libertarianism ever making a breakthrough in Ireland without some kind of an initial conservative grassroots movement happening? I mean, is there any hope in that? Look, let's face it, Milei as a libertarian, that was an anti-system vote. It was absolutely an anti-system vote. True. It wasn't because everybody in Argentina went, hey, let's go libertarianism. No, they just wanted to say, let's get out of this system. It's been screwing us for forever. And as for Alice Weidel, I was surprised that she came out and said that, because that is something I think that I think she threw that out there herself. I think that was a bit of a spin and a move to do that, because she hadn't been saying that in previously, which I thought was interesting, and certainly I would say many of her followers would follow her for her conservative views as versus her libertarian
That's
views.
true, yeah, of
So
course.
I just wonder a little bit when I think of dear old Ireland, unable to form an actual opposition, let alone take government positions, and take over the country and get it back on its feet. Where's the hope
think
for?
I think that any party that it would have to come from a party, I think, initially, most likely.
Mm,
Well, for to put down roots and be in the long term successful, AN2 or Irish Freedom Party are the two that jump out immediately, and they have touches of it anyway. Um, they could very clearly put together a type of national libertarianism that Professor Casey and Professor Kinsella touched on there, which is this strong passion and love of nation, um, alongside more libertarian economic policies. Um, I think that it's important that they establish that in the DNA of the party immediately, and they
mm,
build around that, because otherwise it doesn't matter the best intentions, that if you break through, you're going to be found out quickly if you actually have no ideological well to draw from. So it's not enough for, let's say, a party, a right wing party, to break through. It has to be a party that believes in something, because the reason we're in this mess is because Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael believe in nothing. Like I said, the added secondary pressure is the Sinn Féin very much do believe in something. They're socialists, and so do people before profit. They have a coherent ideology. And I do disagree with, and of course, Professor Kinsella, I'm not going to say I disagree with him. He's the expert. But
mhm.
what I would say is that political change comes with economic change. I think he understood me to say that I was hoping for an economic crash. What I meant to more precisely to say is that political change comes with economic change. So it's not a wish for situation, just as a
Sure.
matter of fact,
Is
kind of
is this a is this a way of saying, oh, we probably won't ever get there and change until it actually hurts our pockets and hurts us
Yeah,
individually?
I think so. I think so. That,
Mhm.
like, because it did happen that after 2010, people before profit were the big winners. Look at them. They came out of nowhere. Why? Because people believed in their policies? No, because they were, like you said with Maley, they were the
And this
they
is
were the protest vote. You and I
mhm.
spoke before about AFD and how they got their big breakthrough. They were
Yeah.
the protest vote in 2015. They were a
Yes.
nothing party before Merkel kicked open the borders. They
Yeah.
were just
Yeah.
against the EU, as monetary, and but they believed that was all. They were a nothing party. But then she kicked open the borders. They were the right place at the right time, and they
Mm.
now look at them, the second biggest party. And that's what a lot of it is like. A lot of it is look, wait for your moment, and hope it comes. It may not
Yeah.
come, but I
Oh,
think the
oh, even
economics always bring change, though. Economic
even
collapse.
even an even better example, if you could take it, is one that I'm familiar with because I know a lot about the country, people, and economics and everything. Is what actually happened in Romania. And when I talk about what happened in Romania, which is mind blowing, 5 years ago, or let's say 6 years ago, there was no such party as the Our Party. It practically didn't exist. We're talking 5, 6 years ago. And imagine within 5 years to have attained more than 20%, 22, 25% of the vote was an incredible achievement. And how did it happen? Well, actually, COVID. COVID is pretty much what gave it legs. Of course, it was a very a right wing conservative movement as well, about family. It was anti woke. It was anti green agenda. So there was a lot of the anti in it as well. But the luck and the stroke of luck that got it uh, to a propelled position of 22 to 25% was that they were the only party that were anti-lockdowns. They were the only party that were anti-mask,
Yeah.
and that did wonders for them. So maybe that's what happens in Ireland if there is a grassroots movement in the making. Maybe somewhere down the line, depending on how our economy fares out in Ireland in the coming years, that maybe this government won't go the full term, and maybe there will be an opportunity for a some form of a grassroots movement, or I don't know, maybe it's a space and an opportunity for Irish Freedom Party to grow and to do a lot more. But I think something like that will have to happen, because otherwise we're going to be stuck with what we have now. And I believe if it stays on the same track, it's probably going to even be harder get them out as they win more and more of the votes that they will get from social say immigrants, from a standpoint of the additional votes that they'll get from welfare migrants effectively. So I just wonder what are your thoughts on that?
Establishment,
Yeah.
you're right. That's right. It's a race against time in Ireland. I think that's clear. That
Yeah, well,
exactly.
one of there's I see Elaine Mullally's stepped back in here, and I'm curious to hear Elaine's thoughts on, if you've time, in relation to, she's just come back in. I don't know if she's heard it now about, what are her thoughts for what could happen or how things could evolve in Ireland. I don't know if she'd share her thoughts on that with us, but how does she think things might evolve in Ireland? What would be the opportunities that would give us our country a chance to get the crew that we have out now? So Elaine, if you'd like to come up and join us, and there's some other people that have been here for quite a long time. Maybe you could.
Oh yeah, anyone who wants to come up, please do.
Yeah, so just request a microphone if you want to come up. I see I have one here. I'm going to throw one down. Elaine, there you go. We got Elaine Mullally. I'm interested to hear what she has to say. Elaine, you should have a microphone on its way to you now.
Hi, lads.
Hey, Elaine.
Hi, Owen. How are you?
How are you?
Good.
Good.
Did you go out and have your dinner there?
I haven't heard all of it. I heard the beginning, I heard the early stages of the talk for about an hour, and then I just came back in there. So, look, I also think that we need something strong. We need to have very clear vision on where we're going to go with an alternative, and where that goes, I have no idea. But we definitely need to start establishing something. Otherwise, it's just going to be the same old time and time again. So,
Elaine, you now have an expert view, insider view, having been with a party system set up the Irish Independent Ireland Party, and having run as an independent yourself. Gun to your head, what is the way forward? Independence or party system for real change?
Great question.
I think what's after happening in the last few weeks with independence in government, I think independents are finished in the country, at least for the next maybe 10, 15 years, because when I was out canvassing, I was asked quite a few times, what the first question was, what party are you with? And when I said I'm not with a party, who were you with? I said I've never been with a party. And then, would you get into bed with one of the government parties if you got elected? And I said no. So that was a big deal for people on the doors. So the fact that there's an awful lot of the independents after getting into bed with government, I don't think it's a good sign. I don't think it's going to send a clear message out to the electorate. So I think the only way forward is actually a new party. And Independent Ireland was obviously formed as a new party to stand up to oppose government, and well, we can see what happened there. But I think a new party is the only way forward. I can't see another alternative at the moment, to be totally honest.
Do you think Antu can grow, Elaine?
I'd like to think they could, Owen. I mean, they're partially there. It's just to step right into the whole. There's a bit more courage and a bit more conviction that they need to bring to the table before people will really believe that they are representative of. There's a boldness required, and it's not there at the moment. We're all a little bit afraid of the logos, the branding, the name calling, being put into categories. That's the old Catholic religion still hanging on in Ireland, and it stops us wanting to be put into a category and ostracized by the rest of the herd.
I don't want to put you on the spot too much now, Elaine, but I would love to know again, because you have this amazing breadth of experience now, much more so than any of us. If you were to start up a new party tomorrow, what would be some of the core, values or elements how would you go about setting it up for long-term success?
Not putting you on the spot now at all, Elaine.
Not at all.
There's no spot there, is there? you know, be clear now. I think I think
what I'm saying
our
is I don't
fundamental
expect you to have a
freedom.
manifesto here, Elaine.
No, I understand, but I do think that if we've learned anything in the last 5 years, it is that, you know, government will very willy-nilly take away our freedom of expression and our rights, and I think that that's probably a red line for me, or it should be for any party going forward, is that there's no justification for taking away people's livelihoods, people's freedoms, for something that's perceived, you know, or that it's, you know, it can be one person can say it's science and somebody else can completely deny or overrule that. So I think freedom is probably, like, we don't have as strong a constitution as they have in America, which is unfortunate, because so
Yeah.
freedom of freedom of expression, freedom of speech will be huge,
Yeah.
and there's probably a whole lot of other things. You know, obviously we have to look at the lack of the control of immigration in the country. People are concerned about it and they have queries about it, and there's an awful lot of money being spent on it. It's our money. We're working and earning our taxes and stuff. So
No,
there's a lot.
Elaine,
I
certainly,
don't know
sorry
where.
to interrupt you. Certainly, Elaine, one thing that's resonating there with what you said is in relation to independence, let's say, as a brand. I think that's actually damaged. I really do. I think the whole concept of just independence is somewhat a damaged brand as a brand, as an idea. And I think it's got to be a party. And what you said was that, you know, the people asked, are you with a party? And you said, no, I was never with a party, or so on and so forth. So what was their underlying concern? Was it stability? Was it something else? Or what was their concern? So you're not with a party, so they wouldn't vote for an independent. Is that what you're saying?
No, they wanted to vote for something different. They want an alternative, and
Right.
even as an independent, they didn't see an independent as an alternative because they were afraid of what was going to happen, which actually happened, and that was that independence can be easily swayed.
Yeah.
You can be bought. You can be brought in through, you know,
And
the lure of power can bring you into anything. So I think that was the concern, was like, well, how do we know you're not going to sell your soul for
And they have. And I mean,
your,
is it fair to say,
yeah.
Elaine, that one of the reasons that you decided to actually step down from the party that you founded was for the very reason that the party took a different direction itself, not just independence, but even independent Ireland at that point in time, if we look at where Kieran Malooly decided to go a different route in Europe. But I think what you're saying here I think it hammers home the point that independence going to the door looking for votes is a weak proposition going forward.
Yeah, for now it is, because it's after been damaged. And I mean, people would have asked me as well, you know, what can an independent do? And my line was always, well, what can a backbencher TD do who's been whipped into submission because they're not allowed to represent people that they're meant to represent as an independent? I would have an independent voice and I would be able to voice the concerns of the people of my constituency. But in reality, when you're looking at government formation, independents, unless you have a serious amount of them who all have a very similar outlook, nothing's going to change. Like, I hate to admit it, because, you know, the whole political system is so corrupt and it's rotten to the core. And I'm calling out a lot of the stuff. You can see it on Twitter. I'm not afraid to call out. And I know people are probably saying, well, if you got elected, you would have been one of these people who was drawn out of that whole system, and you would have been one of these people who was off 20 odd, only worked 20 days in the last 6 months. But I wouldn't. I'd be calling it out from the inside, because that's the type of person I am, where a lot of people are quite happy to be in that system and operating the way they are. In fact, it's just completely fallen into their laps. They want to do nothing for the next 5 years. And then the election comes back up and they go back out and just rely on the same people to come out and keep voting over and over and over again for the same thing.
I think this is really hitting on exactly why I want conversations like this about libertarianism and systems of politics and thought, because Fianna Fáil, as you say, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael stand for nothing. Literally, that's why they're in power together now, because they stand for nothing. So and it was inevitable. They have no deeper philosophical. Nobody in Ireland has has these conversations come election time about, well, what's your political philosophy? Where do you stand? And worse, the opposition to that, or the alternative to that, is independent. And well, what's independent? Independent depends naturally on the locality and the X, Y, and Z. It's not a political stance in and of itself. So there is no defined political stance anywhere there. So like Elaine, when you're saying there and you have to go to the door, we're totally, we're a ideology free, a political ideology free nation. We're not used to that. I think it would be so useful if we were able to, instead of you having to go to the door and say, well, migration's a problem and I think we need this and that, and you have to go with a grab bag of different concepts. It would be lovely if we could get to a point where you could say, well, I'm a libertarian or with Libertarian Party, and people have an understanding of what those principles mean. I know that we would be very, very far from it, and I don't even know if we have the appetite for it in Ireland. But if you look at someone like Sinn Féin, they implicitly know, the younger ones, that they're a socialist party. So they've managed to inculcate that in their followers. Same with the Greens. They understand, followers understand that they are a social justice party that dabbles in the odd bit of environmentalism when it suits them. But anyone outside of that stand for nothing. And so that's why it's very, very difficult, I think, for anyone to break through, because we're trying to break through without a wider platform, a defined platform, without a clear document that we can point to and say, this is who we are, what we stand for, so that we don't get dragged all over the place. Because Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are set up to get dragged all over the place to follow votes. So any opposition independent is going to have to follow them in order to get the votes as well. So because they're detached from any ideology or philosophy, everybody else who wants to compete with them is as well. So I think you need a party who is willing. This is where I would give A&2 credit, that they were happy with being a small party for however long it took, that they could get through on principle. You need some element of that, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think structure and
like you have to stand for something.
some
You know what I
form
mean?
of, yeah. Well, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for everything. So you have to decide what it is. What's your modus operandi? Why are you here? What's your purpose? And stand into that. And even if it is a little bit, I won't say controversial, but if it's not the accepted norm at this given point in time, at some point in time it might be, because people will just get so fed up of where we're going. And like I was 100%, the independence was the way to go, and I would have loved if it had been, but I can really see now that it's just a mixed bag, and realistically, it was too dependent upon so many people having the same mindset, and that was a dream. That's a pipe dream. That's not a reality, because a lot of independents are either failed politicians from one of the parties, they're disgruntled, they didn't get picked, they, for whatever reason they decided to run. There's not an awful lot of people who would be genuinely and authentically coming from a space of wanting change, who will put themselves forward. Because
the change can't be anything that has the name conservative in it, because we still in Ireland hate that, because it brings up images of Margaret Thatcher and British Conservative Party. So that's out the window. You can't use any branding or ideology in relation to that. Also, they're doing their best to tarnish the notion of nationalist. And so, that there is what that shows me is that it is very much possible to associate certain ideals and beliefs with a brand, with a label, with a political ideology. So if somebody was to come along and start up a party that's based on libertarian values, it's fresh ground, the brand isn't being destroyed, and they have ample room in the Irish context to develop it for the Irish context. And I think that then if you can associate that in the public mind with, well, it means this, this, and this, you can frame it positively, instead of having to go to the door come elections and look at the ground while you talk about migration or whatever else,
Yeah, very good. Owen, just to jump in there, Martin has his hand up for a while, and then there's Drager Carl there, so I just wanted to let you know. Sure, Martin, you want to pop in there and go ahead? Martin?
Hi, sorry, apologies. My phone is being very unresponsive. Yeah, so some of the points I was going to make were actually covered there by Owen. Hi, Owen, Aidan, and Elaine. I
Hi,
hope you're all
Mark.
keeping well. Yeah, so look, I just want to literally throw it out there and put it out as a point of fact that Ireland needs a staunch conservative libertarian party. That is what Ireland needs right now, more than anything. A staunch conservative libertarian party. Libertarianism is a wide spectrum, and that's why I put in staunch conservative, because it's very, very, very important that it is a staunch conservative party. But the libertarian philosophy, in my understanding, is limited government. That is the most important thing we should strive for as a people right now, because the harm people. A lot of people don't realize the harm that's being done to them, and not necessarily them because they don't feel it straight away, but the harm that's going to be done to future generations. You know what I mean? It's your kids and your grandkids that are going to suffer our indifference and our, we've taken our foot off the pedal and our hand off the wheel, so to speak, and we've allowed government to control every aspect of our lives, which, you know what I mean, in the now, because we live in a welfare state, the majority benefit, or at least a third of the population. Well, 2/3 of the population benefit, because the third is on social welfare of some sort, and the other third is actually working for the state, while the final third bears the brunt of every government mistake, every downturn, economic downturn, every, you know what I mean? So we all understand this, but nationalism is not the solution politically for, would say, toppling the government and offering. My personal belief is we're heading into a massive financial crisis again. There's going to be another collapse, and if you watch the markets, it's inevitable. It is going to happen. And also, you have to take into account that America has been at war with Europe for the last 5 years, and people don't like to. Oh, America's their ally. They're not. They're an economic rival, and America can no longer compete with China from a manufacturing point of view. Therefore, Europe is the next biggest rival, so that's who they attacked. And you can, if you follow economics, this is the reality, and this is what Trump is going to do. He's going to attack Europe economically. Ireland being the gatekeeper from the world to Europe through the multinationals. They come here for the corporation tax, but they only use that as an access to the European markets. We're a little pawn, and I wish this country realized it was a pawn, and that it stopped trying to play on the world stage, because we're not a world player. We're a tiny island with a tiny population that has no real bearing in massive global affairs. We've made enemies of 2 nuclear powers in the last spate of government. God only knows what Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are going to do in the next government term. Hopefully it will not go to term, but I believe staunch conservative libertarianism is an offer we could give to people that isn't shouty nationalism. And look, nationalism, maybe in the future, if it's refined and it is marketed properly, and we get PR and we get money behind it, it's something you could sell. It's not something you can sell in the now. I believe libertarianism is something, conservative libertarianism is something that we could potentially sell. And like Elaine, I joined politics. Elaine actually started something. I joined a party. I got in, and I had to see how the entire system works. And even in the nationalist parties, they're as, and I know an awful lot about the inner workings of Fine Gael as well, from just some people I know and some insider information. They all operate exactly the same. They're the same dysfunctional families. They're, you know what I mean, there's a whip system in every single one of them. There's dishonesty, there's backstabbing, there's, most Fine Gaelers hate each other, and they come out and be, you know, political candidates and they support each other, but in the background they despise each other. But that's politics. Politics is a dirty, filthy game. But unfortunately, we have to have some form of system. But the smaller we can make that system, and encourage people. Elaine said a very interesting thing there a few moments ago, that, you know what I mean, when she went to the doors, it was, you know, it was kind of, what can I do for you? And people were saying, well, what can you do for me? Why are we asking people that question? There's the great JFK quote, you know what I mean? It's not what it's not what, you know, your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. When did we abdicate personal responsibility? Can anybody? Is there anybody here who can? Was there a definitive time? Was there a date? Or did it just happen over time that we abdicated all personal responsibility? I believe in a small amount of a safety net for those who can't, and I have a very clear definition in my mind of and the difference between those who can't and those who won't. I have no sympathy for those who won't. It's a case of no, the system is there for you to succeed. All you have to do is basically get out of bed every morning. That's it. That's all you have to do. Get up out of bed every morning and show up.
I believe that people are, sorry Martin, fundamentally lazy, and I think they actually hand over a lot of the responsibility to government for various things, such as health. Like, we know that health is actually not actually about health anymore. It's about pharmaceuticals. Health would be exercise, some kind
Elaine,
of.
Sorry to cut across you there, but I'm working on again with great people on that solution, because health boils back down to diet. I'm going to a fantastic place in Sligo.
Well, diet,
Yeah.
exercise.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
but
stuff.
on Sunday.
What I'm saying is that people hand that over to, and I'm using inverted commas here when I say experts, but the experts are, the older generation who let food be thy medicine, let medicine be thy food, and that's what we are putting into our bodies from food, water, whatever we're consuming, even mentally. That becomes your life and becomes your reality and becomes who you are. So I think personal responsibility is a word that, should be very much taught in schools among our younger generation, to let them understand that, this is not about the government to sort out, or a health board. And it's not a health board, it's a medical profession to sort out. This is all about what you do. People spend years making themselves sick, and they walk into a doctor and they want a tablet to fix it instantly. That's not the way life works. You have to be always looking after your health, always looking out for the next stage in your life where you can benefit, where you can help yourself. And I know that sounds, well, it's not washy, it's genuine, but I just think that that personal responsibility, I'd love to know when it disappeared and how it disappeared so quickly. But people seem very happy. When you look at even these warnings that the government, Met Éireann and all that issue, and the country was able to close down for a whole week. 2 weeks ago, schools were closed down, businesses were closed down because of an orange status warning over snow. And yet there was people ringing my business looking to know, can we go in? Our children have school is closed. Can we go in and play? They couldn't go to school, but they could come out to play. And but there's a hypocrisy and stuff there that makes no sense. But yet you can't explain that to people, because they don't seem to understand that this is your life. You take responsibility. You have this opportunity in your life to stand into what you need to do and accept who you are and what you're about. But yet they want to hand. It's incredible. It's
We can
actually
fix
incredible
this.
to watch.
But we can actually fix this, and through very simple projects. And it's not necessarily propaganda, but we'll use social media to do it. So I don't know if any of you are aware of Conway's Farm. So James and I would have been political allies at a point, but we've both left the party since. But James is a fantastic concept, and we're going to Sligo on Sunday we're going to discuss building self-sustainable farms and communities, to invite people from all walks of life to come, and this is how you grow food, this is how you do this is how you live a healthy lifestyle, this is how you become active, this is how you be the best you, so to speak. And if we succeed and could put one of these into every single county, we can teach people that you don't actually need pharmaceuticals for the most part. You don't actually need government for the most part. What you need is a strong, self-resilient community. You need friends and family, and you need a network of people who can. You're not getting anything for free, because everybody can contribute. It doesn't matter. We all have skills. Everybody has a skill. You know what I mean? Your skill might be the most simple thing. I can type fast. My God, we need somebody to type out a manifesto for us. Can you do that? And can you get it? You know, everybody has a skill, and those skills can be traded. And we need to get back to that kind of a community. And if you were to build a tiny little community like that in every little village in Ireland, and then that goes to the towns, and look, I personally think in the long term the cities are lost, but if you go to your village into your medium-sized town, into your big-sized town, and you have a network of people who are back trading skills, trading stories, trading experience, trading knowledge, people will realize that you don't actually need handouts. You don't need this billion-euro health service that is completely and utterly dysfunctional because it's too big a monster to manage, and there's too many layers and levels and stuff like that. All you need to do is just, you know, spend a little bit more time outside, spend a little more time walking, spend a little more time talking to your neighbors, spend
bit more time out in the sun without
factor
you
don't look, sorry,
etc.
sunscreen is not necessary. It's something that should not be on our shelves. Sunglasses.
Can I throw something out there? And it's only because there's a guy listening. I don't want to embarrass you, Conor Dunn, but you're there. He's a young Fine Gaeler and he's from my own community, and I'd be very keen to hear. He's after listening to quite a lot about libertarianism, and he's a lovely young lad. And if he wouldn't mind raising his hand, and maybe Aidan or
Sure.
Owen will let him on to speak.
On the way.
His name is Conor.
Yes.
Conor Dunn, and
We'll convert him to libertarianism. And then he can
exactly. But he's a very
start
keen,
the revolution
he's very
inside
keen
Fine
on
Gael. Good
politics.
man.
There's a mic passing down to Conor, and while the mic is passing down to Conor, Elaine, maybe we can hear from Draeger Carey, who's got an interesting
brilliant
profile. So hang in there. Go ahead, Draeger.
Oh, how you doing? Just to answer Martin's question about when it really did start, the Great Society with Lyndon Johnson was the beginning of when we started inverting questions. Like, instead of asking what makes prosperity, that's when we started asking how to end poverty. And it's those kind of inversions that led to where we are now, where we think that entire industries have grown up under this idea of how to end poverty, rather than saying how do we take personal responsibility to get ourselves out of it and make our own lives prosperous. So it is that personal accountability thing that we just don't acknowledge because we're too busy focusing on an inverted question. I would talk sometimes with a lot of people, a lot of friends and stuff like that, about how we've inverted incentive structures, and they have completely ruined how we view things in society. It's how we're kind of educated, which was what the second point I was going to make is that if you look for information on sort of libertarian thinkers, or like from Thomas Sowell to Hayek to Friedman to Rothbard, what you actually end up with is you have to go searching for it. It's not readily available. I mean, if you go and if you hear about the Mises Institute, their videos, their lectures are put up all over YouTube. It's easy to access, but the algorithms do restrict it. And you have to actually know or be informed about it. And I think providing those resources for people, and just not in a sort of which I find with some libertarians is a absolute superiority complex that they have, is that they have greater knowledge than everybody else, to just gently guide people to where they can find information. Like Per Byland's lecture on regulation is probably one of the most interesting things you'd ever listen to, because it points out how very clearly the EU has stifled actual growth in Europe. Now, it's from an American perspective, and he's not talking about the EU, but it wonderfully encapsulates how the EU has absolutely ruined growth and development in Europe from multiple different countries. And I would definitely, like, if somebody or if more people here would put up those kind of resources, I think, and even just generally talking to friends, family and stuff like that, just providing gentle guidance towards these kind of YouTube channels, etc., That way you can actually educate people. And I think it's the education is the hardest part, and it's the most worthy part to guide people towards it. Because once you start reading it and understanding it, you very, very quickly decide, actually, this makes a lot more sense. And this seems to be a better way of thinking and looking at things. Now, I do have issues with the sort of left libertarian. I am socially conservative, but I would just really recommend that kind of way of speaking with people rather than the anger that seems to be just endemic throughout both political perspectives. That's me.
Excellent, Rager. Thank you for that. Connor, great that you came up. I think, Connor, if I'm correct, you're a young man, you're 16 or so?
16, I'm 17 on the 21st of next month.
Good man, Connor. Thanks for coming up. So you're old friends with Elaine, are you?
Well, I know her through before I got into politics. I know her well. My sister's good friends with her daughter, so I know her from before politics and now in politics.
How did you get attracted to politics, and why specifically Fine Gael? Family or?
Well, I always liked history in school, and I still like history in school. I've great debates with my history teacher the whole time, every day nearly.
Good man.
And I always liked Fine Gael because I kind of felt like they were kind of the responsible adults. You mightn't agree with me, but I always felt like that way with Enda Kenny and Michael Noonan in 2011. They just always kind of attracted to me as there was good people in the party, I thought. And since I've joined, geez, I would absolutely back up. There's great people in the party who do excellent work.
Good man. So now, as a young party member now, what kind of stuff do you do?
Well, we have our national conference coming up. It starts actually today on my birthday. I'm running for position myself on the national executive. So we'd have events like that. We have summer schools where we get together. We might go bowling sometimes, different meetups. So it'd be all kind of social stuff and political stuff.
Connor, what kind of I think it's brilliant that you're doing that you're getting involved. I'd hope we can wean you maybe away from Fine Gael, or at least maybe we can you're the future and we can lean on you a bit. Elaine can lean on you. But Connor, what would be your belief system? What are the big things that are important to you as a young man in modern Ireland?
Oh, that's kind of a geez, you kind of caught me there. Well,
I know, Connor, I'm putting you on the spot. Take a minute.
No, you're grand, but I consider myself conservative. Like I'm in a conservative party that's traditionally conservative. I consider myself conservative enough.
Good man.
A bit libertarian. I feel like I agree with free will. People are allowed to do what they want to do in their life and pursue what they want to do. That'd be a lot of my philosophy thinking.
I think I saw Charlie Flanagan. He was not so long ago, and I mean, he comes from a family that was very much a conservative, side of the party, and he said that he thinks it's getting harder and harder for conservatives in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I don't. So I think it's very good to see that you, a young conservative man, is coming through. Do you think there's a lot like yourself out there, conservative young men?
I would say so, and I feel like there's still conservative people in the party, TDs, senators. Now, people don't like to label themselves anymore. I wouldn't be a big one and always just saying I'm conservative, because you're kind of just putting yourself into one church, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And
well, I think that's also politically smart.
Yeah, like I have friends who are in Fianna Fáil. I don't know anyone in Sinn Féin. I had a granduncle who was in Sinn Féin, so that'd be one, but he left since, I think. But like I get along with people on all different sides, which I think is important in politics.
What would you say are your kind of core principles? Are young lads your age still quite religious, Connor?
Sort of.
Or is that not really important anymore? Like I say, once upon a time, as we spoke about earlier, I mean, that was kind of the pinnacle of conservative, you know. Do you think that's what would you say are the more important kind of principles for a young conservative nowadays?
Well, I think a lot of people aren't as religious as they used to be, and look, that's again like libertarianism, free will. So they're allowed to be whatever religion they want to be nowadays. That's not my business, but I consider myself quite religious, and that'd play a factor in a lot of things of my beliefs. The fact that I am Catholic, I might go to mass every Sunday, but I'd still pray, and I'd still, you know what I mean, go to cemetery mass whenever it's on. So that would be a core thing. conservatism. Now, it wouldn't be extreme conservatism. It'd be
Sure.
kind of nearly a bit like both George Bush's kind of conservative, moderate conservatism.
What's your feeling about the future of the country right now? How do you feel? Confident, nervous?
I'd say confident. I say most people here would disagree with me, but I think they've appointed a good cabinet. I thought the reshuffle is done very well. They put good people into different positions, and as people don't like to say this, but about moving them around, I think that's healthy. You need to have different people working with the departments. Like if you have the same person for years, you need someone new in there. Like I think Jennifer Carroll McNeil is one to watch now. Gone into health. I think she's going to do a good job in there because she's feisty and she'll get things done and she makes sure things are done.
She's feisty. Good man.
Fair play. There's hope for us. There's hope for us.
There is, and in fairness, Connor has done a lot of canvassing locally for up until the locals. He canvassed for a local man in our constituency, and then in the generals he canvassed for Willie Aird, who took a seat. He's a young gentleman is how I describe him, because you can always have a conversation with him. Yeah, he's very respectful.
I can hear that. He's
he respects,
very articulate.
yeah, very respectful of everybody's
I
opinions.
appreciate that.
And we had great chats about stuff on the door, and when he called to me, and that's why I respect anybody who can have a conversation with you without bringing it down to to a lower level. And he's done his homework, and he's one to look out for in the future, that's for sure. And I do believe his heart's in the right place, so the future is bright to a certain extent.
Connor's kind of young man that'll give us some hope, Elaine, and fair play to him. Owen, just would it be possible if I could just jump back to Draeger Carroll and just ask him about something that has a curiosity on his bio, which is about the fact that he believes that Javier Milei will be a case study, which he may very well be right, but I'd love to hear about another libertarian as to a little bit from Draeger in relation to Milei and how he believes it's going to pan out from a perspective of him being a case study in the future. Draeger, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely no problem. This is kind of the first time that South America doesn't have excuse the French, but a batshit crazy leader. His credentials are really, really he's a serious individual. That South American flair might be odd or off-putting to some people, but that's nothing compared to his background, his qualifications. He's a really, really interesting character. And the reason why I think it's going to be a case study, it's probably one of the first times we've seen somebody actually approach sort of state-based governance in a laissez-faire, anarchist, anarcho-capitalist way for probably the past 150 years. There has been some form of government interventionism for about 150 years. We haven't really had laissez-faire capitalism or anarcho-capitalism, and this is going to be a really interesting change from a truly socialist system into a free market system. Like we've already seen, and there's been a lot of sort of propaganda done by some of the major outlets that have been claiming that poverty was on the rise, inflation still went up, all that kind of stuff. But underneath, that's actually all false. The country is due for 5.5%, I believe that's the latest figure, growth. The poverty rate has dropped from, I think it was 51.4 when he took over. It's now dropped to about 39.8. Every single thing that they were saying he would fail at has so far been reversed or is clearly working out better than was originally claimed. And I'm fascinated to see how this is going to progress. And I think this should be, not only do I want it to be a case study, I think it should be something that people pay attention to. Ireland is very sheltered. We're very colloquial. We don't look at outside countries doing interesting things. And because of that, I think it's probably one of the countries that we should focus on most, because that's where you'll see the policies that he's introduced that would be most beneficial for Ireland in the long term. That's me.
Very good.
Very good, Drager. I'm actually quite a big fan of Mile for quite some time. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it. I struck up some friendships online here and actually on X with numerous Argentinians who were also big fans of his. And of course, I've heard the other side of it as well. But it's a long move from Peronism anyway, and I think it's going to be very interesting the outcome. Not to mention how he's achieving it from a perspective of not printing money. I think that's just such a brave move. I'm really impressed with what he's doing, and like you said, like I think he's actually going to certainly increase the popularity in the interest in libertarianism anyway, for sure. Anyway, Owen, I hand it back to you because I think we're running up or 3 hours and 20 minutes. So
I think it's time for us all to go to bed. I think everyone there in Ireland, go to bed. I'm going to be the papa in the room and tell you all to have your cup of tea and go to bed. Listen, thanks a lot to everybody who listened in tonight. Thanks for everyone who stuck with us. I mean, I think myself and Aidan had believed it was going to be a very early night after the disaster with poor Professor Casey. The second time we've had trouble trying to talk to him. I've already spoken to him in the messages though, and we're going to do another do the interview. We'll have to do it in another platform or something though. I think he's scarred, the poor man. But listen, we had some phenomenal speakers on tonight. Unbelievable speakers on tonight.
Wonderful.
Professor Kinsella too was amazing.
Honor, and great to see Elaine, Martin, other people like that coming.
Yeah, our usual faces. That's lovely that they came up and
enjoyed it very much.
Feeling brave. So listen, I'll say good night to everyone. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for sticking with us. Aidan, I'll let you say good night there and we'll sign out.
All the best. Thanks very much, Sean. Great stuff. Great stuff. I didn't realize 3 hours and 18 minutes. I think that's one of the longer ones we've done on. I certainly didn't think it was going to turn out like this after the shit show we had at the start, not being able to get for Gerard on. What a shame. But thanks to all the speakers. And apologies to any of the speakers who didn't get on. It was a pleasure to talk to you all and hope you have a good evening. Mind yourselves out there and all the best. Thank you very much.
Good luck, everyone.